Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the October 13th, 2015 meeting of the Glendale City Council. May we have the roll call, please?
Council members Devine.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Garpetian.
Here.
Sinanian. Mayor Najarian.
Here. And our flag salute will be led by Councilman Barton Garpetian. Would you please do us a favor?
Please join me in saluting the flag of our great nation. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for this evening's invocation. October is Filipino American Heritage Month, and it is an occasion for all Americans to recognize a deep bond between not only the U.S. and the Philippines, but also the hundreds of thousands of Americans who trace their ancestral roots back to this island nation, and who have given so much to this country in the field of politics, armed forces, entertainment, and the arts, sciences, education, business, and healthcare, just to name a few. There are many famous Filipino Americans, but one who was influential to California specifically was the labor leader Philip Vera Cruz, who was one of the principal organizers of the Delano grape strike during the late 60s, and he worked directly with Cesar Chavez. He once said that, quote, "Education and knowledge are what gives minorities power in this country." He knew well that in order to succeed and compete, you need a strong background in education and access to knowledge to represent yourself. He fought to ensure that not only Filipinos, but all minorities in this country had the opportunity to better themselves through education and equal treatment under the law. This evening, we honor leaders like Vera Cruz, but also the countless other Filipino Americans, and give a prayer of thanks for all that they have accomplished and contributed to our great nation. We're grateful to our own neighbors and friends of Filipino descent who helped make Glendale the shining jewel it is. We pray for their success so our community rises together to new heights. We pray for this and for peace at home and around the world. And possibly a Dodger victory tonight, too, wouldn't be so bad. Thank you. Amen.
Amen.
May we have your report on the agenda, not the Dodger game report, Mr. Kasaki. Although I wouldn't mind a few updates throughout the meeting as we go on.
Certainly. If you see my color change, you'll know that the score isn't going so well for our boys in blue. We'll keep our fingers crossed. The agenda for the October 13th, 2015 regular meeting of the Glendale City Council was posted on Friday, October 9th, 2015 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. And what is the next item?
Under presentation and appointments, 3A is agenda preview for the meetings of Tuesday, October 20th, 2015.
Ms. Beers.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, our regularly scheduled Housing Authority and Council meetings for October 20th have been canceled. Our next regular meetings are scheduled for October 27th to commence at 3 p.m. We do, however, have a Glendale City Council meeting, Work Boot Tuesday, next Tuesday, October 20th, and that'll be at 3 p.m. at Shoal Canyon Landfill, and it will be held at the Glendale Fire Regional Training Center at Shoal Canyon Landfill, which is located at 3910 East Glen Oaks Boulevard. Again, Shoal Canyon Landfill, next Tuesday, the 20th at 3 p.m., and that is located at 3910 East Glen Oaks Boulevard.
Very good. Next item, please.
Next item is Mayor's commendation for Oliver Shoku.
Mr. Shoku. Who has my commendation? Mr. Shoku, I'm going to ad-lib because I don't have the commendation, but this is the 32nd year of the Love Ride, of which you and Harley Davidson of Glendale sponsor. It is a fundraiser for those people that aren't familiar with the Love Ride, and it is one of the more exciting and vibrant events to hit downtown Glendale at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning. It's a Sunday, isn't it? This Sunday, yeah. This Sunday morning. Yeah. And you bring in all sorts of celebrities that give Glendale a little bit of flair and a little bit of notoriety. These are some of the well-behaved members on the Love Ride. There is one of the more brightly decorated Harleys. And who is that?
That's young Oliver there.
Oh, my goodness.
That's the first Love Ride.
No kidding.
Willie G. Davidson.
And Willie G. Davidson, the grandson of the founder of the motor company.
And here's an aerial view the intersection of San Fernando and Brand. I mean, when I say thunder, it is rolling thunder. It is loud, it is brash, it is colorful. And Jay Leno kicks it off with a few jokes and digs at anyone that is within earshot. And this year, but I believe your charities have changed, have they not? You rotate through some of them. Why don't you tell us about the charities that you've served over the last?
First off, this is my daughter Emily. She's the future of Harley-Davidson Glendale and the designated successor, and she's a big part of the Love Ride. Well, we first started to benefit the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and then since then we've had a whole array of different charities, including autism, Reading by Nine, literacy program. Last 2 years ago we had USO, and this year's the Wounded Warriors Project.
And I'm going to quiz you. Over the last 32 years, how many $1 million have been raised?
We've grossed a little over $24 million. We hope to get up to $25 million in our grand finale, of which out of the 24 during the course of the 31 years, we've donated, actually written check to these charities for $14 million. This year's looking good. We're going to be sold out. In fact, on some of the registration portals, the site's closed now. We were over capacity, so I think we're going to do good. I think we're going to reach our 25 million goal, and hopefully a big chunk of that will go to the Wounded Warriors Project. It's been kind of difficult last few years to stay in the black because of a lot of factors, economy being one of the major factors.
And after the kickoff in Glendale, there is a convoy to Castaic.
Yes.
And Dan Bell's favorite band, the Foo Fighters, will be playing this year. And it's a festival at that end also.
Yes.
And it certainly is a huge commitment that you've made, and I understand that this has been the longest-running motorcycle fundraising event in the world.
Yes, it has been, and it's kind of bittersweet for me to end it, but, at one point, like you said, all good things have to come to an end, so...
Well, let's not say goodbye, let's say au revoir.
And, we're going to keep the foundation alive. We hope to continue to do some things with it, but it's not going to be another Love Ride, because it's an awful lot of work.
Okay.
It's been a big part of my life and hers, and so we are going to keep the foundation alive and going in some capacity. In a smaller way, maybe we'll just continue to somehow, in a tangible way, hopefully give back to the community.
Well, you've been a great corporate citizen of Glendale, and I know that there are other corporations and businesses much, much larger than you that haven't given 1% of what you've raised for these groups of charities that you mentioned. So we very much appreciate it. I'm going to present you with the commendation that reads, "Congratulations on the 32nd Annual Harley-Davidson of Glendale Love Ride. This year's event will be the final Love Ride produced by you, and we are sure it will be the best. I highly commend you for your philanthropic efforts in raising nearly $25 million for those in need. Your hard work and commitment has resulted in Love Ride being the longest-running motorcycle fundraising event in the world. On behalf of the City of Glendale, we wish you success on all of your future endeavors."
Thank you very much.
Thank
you very much honored. Thank you.
Give him the cards.
And for the record, Councilman Sinanian has an excused absence. He is under the weather, and he did call in, and we wish him his best as he recuperates from being slightly under the weather. Next item, please.
Next item is a consent calendar, including minutes The following are routine and may be acted upon by one motion. Any member of council or audience requesting separate consideration may do so by making such request before a motion is proposed.
Is there a motion to move the consent calendar?
Also move.
Second. Roll call, please.
Council members Devine?
Yes.
Friedman?
Yes.
Garpetian?
Yes.
Sinanian? Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Next item, please.
Next item under 5 is City Council and staff comments.
We start with Ms. Friedman.
Sure, a lot of stuff going on as always in Glendale. Just wanted to mention a few to credit the organizers and the attendees. First, we had our Glendale Fire Department Awards Luncheon this last week, and it's always extremely well attended. And we were able to give awards to numerous people, both in our fire department and also in the community, who have done outstanding work and service, and people who have been brave and rescued folks. So I want to thank everybody who attended that. That evening, I attended a fundraiser for a group that I think I've mentioned up here before called Family Promise of the Verdugos. Family Promise is a group that works with faith-based groups, congregations, and churches in our community throughout the Verdugos to provide emergency housing for homeless families and to help them transition into permanent housing. They do very targeted work. They do excellent work. They're a lifeline for families in need, and they're really trying to get members of the community involved with helping them through getting their own congregations involved, but also through fundraising. And so I would like to throw out to the Glendale community, I know there's so many people who give so much. If you're interested in really making a difference and looking to help with people that are providing a real crucial kind of care right now, to reach out to Family Promise. You can contact me through my office, and I'm happy to put you in touch. And really want to try to help elevate them. They're helping several families at a time, and it'd be great, and they would like to even expand their services. So a wonderful group. Next, I was able to attend, as several of us did, the amazing dual events in Verdugo Park this very hot Saturday, which was our Canine in the Parks, which is hosted by the Police Foundation, which raises all of the money for our wonderful canine police dogs, and also the Kiwanis Duck Splash, which raises tens of thousands of dollars for different organizations in the community. Lots and lots of people involved in that. It was great to see the community come out and really rally behind those two events. I was there with my child and also our giant dog, walking around, sweating like everyone else, but enjoying the amazing turnout from the community and just seeing all of the wonderful ducks going down the river and all of the wonderful dogs on parade. So thanks for everyone for coming out. And lastly, yesterday I was able to attend the 13th annual Racial Justice Breakfast for the YWCA of Pasadena and the Foothills. They, like our YWCA here in Glendale, provide amazing services. That particular YWCA hosts a lot of events, including a multi-ethnic summer camp for kids in their community, as well as job training and computer training and language classes for folks. So I wanted to just thank them for doing their event. I hope they raise lots of money. My husband's now on the board of the YWCA here, so it's a group that's near and dear to my heart, and it's just great to see what the Ys are doing around the region. Thank you very much.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Mayor.
Mr. Garpetian?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I also attended the fire department's luncheon, award luncheon last week. Also the Canine Police Foundation event in Verdugo Park, along with the dog splash. We released 5,000 dogs at the same time going down that river, man-made river, and they were very anxious to get to the end of it. So it was a fun event, and we brought our legal multi-poo dog, and compared to the canines, it was not a match. But we are, on a different note, our family is hosting 2 students visiting from Korea this week. They're going to stay with us for 2 nights, Wednesday night and Thursday night. And they are from our sister city, Goesong, from South Korea. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And it's a very exciting exchange student program they have. And my daughter Naira is their ambassador at Wilson Middle School, which is very exciting for her as well. This program is through Korean Sister City Association. So we are very honored and humbled to host the 2 students from Korea, and I hope they will have a wonderful time here with us. With that, in the interest of time, Mr. Mayor, I'm stop right here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Devine?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also attended all the events that Councilmember Friedman and Garpetian mentioned, and they were a lot of fun, just as they said. But another one that I attended was done by Commissioner R. Oshigan at the Brand Library. And he gave a lecture featuring his photographs taken here and in Armenia, which showed the disruption of the Armenian community because of the genocide and immigration and the diaspora. And he concluded with the pictorial description of his eyewitness exhibit. Absolutely amazing. It was, he had the exhibit in LA, and I would like to suggest to staff if we can perhaps look into having our Oshigan bring that art exhibit. Part of it doesn't have to be all 24 pieces. I know they're huge, but part of it, or even all of it, to Glendale, so that those of us that missed that, these are pictures of survivors. They're like 24 feet high. I mean, it's absolutely amazing if you didn't see it written up in the LA Times. But I would like for it to be brought here to Glendale, and as I say, in part or in whole, so that those of us that live here can see it and experience it. And I know with our Armenian population, residents, that those that didn't have an opportunity to go down to LA, and for those non-Armenians like myself who never had the opportunity to see it in LA, would have it right here in our city. So I would certainly like for staff to look into that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Actually, those were on display
Here.
at Brand Library
Yes.
right before they went to Grand Park.
Oh.
So we got them first, and
Okay. Can we bring them back?
I'm
for
sure it's up
a
to
second?
the artists and library staff to make that happen. Well, there's really not much left to talk about. I think we covered most of the events, although I did go to an event at the Los Angeles Cathedral, which is for a group called Girls Today, Women Tomorrow, and it targets at-risk young girls and gives them counseling and encouragement and basically shepherds them along through high school and through college. A very great event, and we had a chance to meet Ms., I believe her name is Shotwell, who is the CEO of SpaceX, and this is the private space rocket launch company that is sending rockets into space to supply the International Space Station. She herself was a mechanical engineer, faced all kinds of odds, and eventually became and is CEO of one of the most dynamic and important companies involved in space and aerospace today. So that was very wonderful. To top it off, I was at the Armenchik concert on Friday at a sold-out Nokia theater. There were 8,000 people in the theater. Probably about 5,000 were from Glendale. Armenchik is a Glendale resident. He really is a singer with some international acclaim. He has sung before Vladimir Putin and presidents of other countries. He did his first concert in the United States in the Glendale Alex Theater in 2002. So he has a near and dear place in his heart for Glendale, and we wish him the very best and many years of continued success. Are there any comments by staff or anyone else? Okay, let's move on to the next item.
Mr. Mayor and Council, next is the item 6, which is community event announcements, reserved for 3-minute community event announcements.
Thank you. Ron Farina and Sharon Townsend.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council members, senior management staff. My name is Ron Farina. I'm with the Red Cross, and with me tonight is Sharon Councilman. Oh, and we have a message from Fritz Coleman, so let him roll.
Hello, my good friends. It's Fritz Coleman once again interrupting the important business of the Glendale City Council to tell you about my 24th annual comedy night to benefit the Red Cross. The city council people who were in office back when I started this are now permanently termed out. You know what I mean? However, I'm asking for your help once again. We've never disappointed you once in the 24 years. Here's what's happening. It's our 24th year. This year it's going to be Sunday, November 1st at the Glendale Center Theater, that gorgeous theater in the round. No better place to do a show. The show time is at 7 o'clock. Doors will open at 6:45. And of course, the address is 324 North Orange Street in Glendale. There's convenient parking just to the right of the theater or in plenty of lots nearby. You won't have to walk far to park at all, even if you get there late. We have the best comics in the world. And this year, we're going to have a surprise guest. You'll have a lot of fun. Top talent, Las Vegas, television talk shows, their own specials on Showtime. You'll love it. It's a clean show, too, but we're not recommending you bring kids because they won't be offended. They'll just be bored out of their heads. So just have an adult night out and you won't be embarrassed. Tickets are only $20 this year. 2 ways to buy them. You can get them at the website, which is american.redcross.org/Glendale. That's American, all lowercase, american.redcross.org/Glendale. Or you can do it on the phone, 818-243-3121, and press 0. Love to see you for the 24th annual comedy night. That officially makes the Red Cross the longest relationship I've ever had. Oh. Sad, really. See you November 1st.
Thank you, Fritz. And with me tonight is Sharon Townsend with the Glendale Healthy Kids. And as I've mentioned before, we're in partnership, and I'll turn it over to Sharon.
Thank you. We're very lucky to have Fritz Coleman as the MC for the 24th year in a row. He's been a great supporter of not only the city of Glendale, but of the Red Cross and also Glendale Healthy Kids. We love him because he gives us a lot of free PSAs on the news. So I welcome you to come and see him and thank the council members who have already purchased tickets. You can purchase tickets from either the Red Cross or Glendale Healthy Kids. I've also passed around your invitation to the Collective Impact Initiative, We Own the Health of Our Community, taking place on November 12th. It's a very important evening for our city as we come together and talk about the future health of our city and our children. And then just on a duck note, the Duck Splash did raise $100,000. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Sevada Hamline. The whole Minutemen are up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, staff. I'm delighted to be here today to present our 10th annual Glendale Friendship Games. Some of you have attended, and some of you have done the bigger Call of Duty and participated and played in the past. And that includes, the fine city staff that always participate every year and take time on a Saturday and Sunday to come out and kind of flex their muscles once in a while instead of trying to think about running the city as their daily job. This year, we're delighted to have the PD joining us again, Glendale PD. We've got participation from a lot of different community organizations, morally and physically trying to participate. So I wanted to make the announcement and the invitation to the city to participate again this year. Our scheduled first game is going to be at 12 o'clock. It's going to be at the Home Men's Center on San Fernando at 3347 North San Fernando Road. I think that's it. We've seen an increase in the expectation of this project over the years. It initially started as a way to kind of celebrate Glendale and take some time to reflect on what we all as a community can do, not only for the youth, but in our different lives, but just focusing on a way to encourage some participation amongst each other. So we're delighted to again have the event this year, and look forward to seeing you all there at 12 o'clock.
Date?
Tip-off starts at 12.
Date?
And when is that? What day is that?
This Saturday.
Oh.
At 12 o'clock at Arad, and I think we'll have our most fun at the 12:30 mark when everybody's ready to sit out and permanently not want to sub back in. So we'll see who's available.
Okay.
Anyways, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Next speaker is Dave Ferguson.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council and staff. I'm with the Sejour Youth Orchestra, and I wanted to give you an update since a year ago when I first presented some information about the orchestra. We've completed the first year of our program in helping kids in Glendale who might not have an opportunity to have music education at the elementary level. We've been providing, while the elementary school is able to provide 1 hour, one teacher for the 1 day a week, we provided 8 hours every week during the last year to students, and we also did a summer camp where we provided 100 hours of music education, providing them with group lessons, and we provide them with free instruments. So we're continuing that program this fall, and we're ready to start a new class of students at Cerritos. We're looking to also start with 2 more schools just as soon as possible. But our goal is to raise some money to make that possible. And so we have a benefit concert coming up on October 18, this coming Sunday at 7 p.m. It will be held at the Glendale City Seventh-day Adventist Church at 610 East California. And we'd love to have you there. You have a flyer, and I've put some more on the back table, highlighting some of the musicians that will be part of that program. Sarah Andon is an international recording artist and soloist. She just came back from Krakow, Poland, where she filled the concert hall 3 times. So we're looking forward to having her as well as the other artists with us. And we want to invite you to come as well. Tickets are available on the web. They're $20 for adult admission, $5 for any student ages 5 to 26, and then we have some reserve seats and some VIP seats available as well. You can purchase the seats or make a donation to the CYO if you're not able to attend, and reserve tickets by calling or emailing me at dave@mycyo.org, and I'll be happy to hold the tickets at will call for you. We've had a number of places like Forest Lawn who have provided donations for parents and children to attend this, and as a result of that, we are working with Glendale Healthy Kids, Healthy Start, and the Glendale Communitas Initiative to provide free tickets for parents and children who might like to come. Just as an aside, I noticed that our city manager's last name is Ochoa, and one of our lead violinists in the orchestra at this point has the same last name. So come and support us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
No pressure, Mr. Ochoa.
All the musical ability ran out of our family many, many generations ago.
Next speaker is Tadej Vartanian.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tadej Vartanian, and I'm here to announce a health festival coming up in just a couple of weeks on Saturday, November 7, 2015, called the Glendale Health Festival. I've had the pleasure of attending as a volunteer, as a pharmacist, to this particular health fair for the past 5 years, and this will be the 6th year that it's going to be going on. Basically, everything at this health fair, from flu shots to dental exams to eye exams, lab tests, blood sugar, blood cholesterol, you name it, it's free. We have a lot of major organizations, hospitals, health facilities, Glendale Healthy Kids, all donating and participating within this organization. Some of the sponsors being listed down there already. Basically, participants can come visit for any of these services at their own will. Every year that I've been attending it, there's been, I would say, at least a 25% increase in participation each and every year. We're anticipating this year to hit over the 2,000 participant mark, which I think for a town like Glendale to organize is very impressive. So I want to thank my colleagues as well as everyone here to make that possible. The festival will also have music, entertainment, food, again, all free of charge. There's going to be local performances as well as activities for kids and families. So this is definitely a festival that, you know, you can make it as a needs-based event. It can be a family-oriented event. People of all ages certainly do come. The The Glendale Health Festival is a community service, like I said. Some of the participants down there you can view as well. If you do have any questions, please come on by. I think there's the flyer that may be circulating on various buses, poster boards, on various billboards that you can see, or feel free to email the email listed, or actually the website listed over there for more information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't have any other cards for this portion of oral communication, so I will deem this portion closed. And let's move on to the next item.
Next item under adoption of ordinances, 7A is ordinance amending Title IV of the Glendale Municipal Code 1995 by adding Chapter 4.13 to authorize the use of alternative project delivery and alternative project management methods for the city's public works projects. This was introduced by Councilmember Friedman on October 6, 2015.
Mr. Mayor, just briefly, as part of the packet, there was an errata sheet that had 2 minor changes there in the packet, so the motion could be made with those particular amendments.
Okay, with the errata sheet. And if there are no questions, I see no cards. Would someone like to make the motion?
Move the item.
Second.
Okay, with the errata sheet. Roll call, please.
Councilmembers Devine,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Garpetian,
Yes.
Sinanian, Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Next item, please.
7B is an ordinance amending Section 2.08.040, 2.08.050, 2.08.130, 2.33, 2.821.100, and 2.82.120 of Title II of Glendale Municipal Code 1995 relating to the Department of General Government and City Auditor. This was introduced by Councilmember Sinanian on October 6, 2015.
I'll move the item.
Second.
If there are no questions or comments, roll call, please.
Councilmembers Devine,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Garpetian,
Yes.
Sinanian, Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Next item.
Under action items, at 8A is Director of Human Resources, Finance, and Chief Information Officer regarding consulting services for the implementation of an enterprise resource planning ERP system. At 8A1 is a motion executing agreement with Tyler Technologies, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $4,778,000 plus contingency of $955,600 for a term of 5 years and an optional additional 5 one-year maintenance renewals for a total term of 10 years. At 2 is a motion executing amendment with Next Level Information Technology, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $200,000 plus contingency of $40,000. At 3 is a resolution appropriating $1,970,000.
Mr. Ochoa.
Yes, sir. We're very pleased and proud to present you with what is admittedly a rather sizable procurement, but when you listen to what it will do for us, how much we are dependent on our ERP system, and the process, the conscientious process that was undertaken by several departments in effect to line up a long-range goal, set objectives, and then systematically achieve all of those objectives leading to tonight, I think you won't be able to help but feel proud for the professionalism and expertise that went into this procurement. So with that, let me have our CIO, Brian Ganley, walk you through this and introduce the team that worked on this project. Brian?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. As Mr. Ochoa mentioned, this has been the capstone tonight of what's been a 2-year effort so far. And yet, upon approval tonight, we will begin phase 2, which will be 3 more years of work on this process. So very extensive, very thorough selection and procurement process thus far. I do want to recognize several colleagues that are here with me tonight. Bob Elliott, Matt Doyle, the executive sponsors for this project, the lead members from each department, Jason Bradford from Finance, Amy Martin from Human Resources, and Damian Patrick from ISD. I also see Art, Hagope, and there are a number of other valuable contributors over the 2 years that we've been working on this project. So, Enterprise Resource Planning System, ERP is the jargon term for this project, and I'll explain what that means. I'm going to go over, not quite as briefly as I normally try to be, but I won't take too much time at the same time. I'm going to go over the background of this project, the 2 years that we've been working on it so far, the analysis that we've done during that time, during that selection process, the timeline going forward, and last but not least, the cost. So the background. Enterprise Resource Planning System, what is it? Commonly called ERP, we also call it Tier 2 in some of our budget documents and strategic objectives, so you may have heard that term. It is a computer system that supports finance, human resources, and payroll. It actually supports much more than that. We have a laundry list of items that it does. I'll read just a few. Things like the general ledger, budget, purchasing, accounts payable, grants management, inventory, fixed assets, accounts receivable, human resources, time and attendance, our payroll system, employee benefits. It integrates with 26 other systems in the city and outside of the city, including our banking institutions, PERS, our insurance institutions, several other agencies that we need to interact with. We have 42 custom processes and procedures in the system today, doing everything from payroll, insurance, benefits, banking, workers' compensation, and many, many more. There is really no department and no section of the city that this software does not touch. I think I would not be exaggerating to say the ERP system is the software that we use to run the city. We have been using the same software now, PeopleSoft, for approximately 20 years. First implemented in 1994 for GEMS, which is HR and payroll, and then expanded in 1998 to include all of the financial functions that I mentioned previously. It's very typical to move on after about 10 to 12 years, and we've been on this system for 20 years now. So it was time to look at what we were doing and how we should move forward. And so that's what we started doing in the fall of 2013, shortly after I arrived here at the city. Some background on the project. Why would we look at changing it? Well, as I just mentioned, it's very common with enterprise software to take a look at what we're doing and how we should move forward after anywhere from 7 to 12 years. We've been doing this for approximately 20 years now. Long-term support. PeopleSoft is what's called a Tier 1 solution. That means that many of the largest global corporations use this software in order to run their unique company operations across the globe. It is something that is big. It can do anything that an organization needs it to do, and that comes with a cost. So 2 issues here. One is that the customizations that I mentioned previously, the 41 different customizations, require us to rely on individual programmers and specialized technical resources that are quite expensive, and that leads us into the cost. PeopleSoft runs on a database called Oracle. The owner of Oracle is quite wealthy. He owns a Hawaiian island, yachts. He's doing very well. And the reason for that is because this is a very expensive system to run. So those are some of the things that we looked at as we started to look at how to move forward on this. The first thing that we did in this process in the fall of 2013 is a request for information for consultants that could help the city go through this complex multi-year process. So we released a request for information in October of 2013. We had several different applicants. We selected what we felt was the most qualified and least expensive, a company called Next Level that specializes in this exact type of process. We came to council in January of 2014 with the results of that RFI, asking for your approval to move forward with a contract with Next Level. And we've been working with them since that process. Over the next several months, nearly a year, we did a very thorough process, and we interviewed 163 of the city staff over 40 different interview sessions over that period of months. We looked at every single system that runs in the city and how it integrates with the ERP that we're using now. So that's where I got those numbers on 26 different systems that we integrate, 42 customizations. We documented all of those things. Next Level produced with us an 83-page report of recommendations that I'll highlight below. The recommendation was that we implement a commercial off-the-shelf system. COTS is the acronym that we use. This is called Tier 2, and that's why we refer to this project as the Tier 2 project in some of our budget and strategic objective documents. This ensures that the city receives the best value possible over the lifespan of the software, which will be 7 to 10 or more years. Significant opportunities identified to improve business processes and take full advantage of new technology. With the recommendation that I'm going to cover in just a moment, commercial off-the-shelf software is designed to do a particular function. So whereas PeopleSoft today is designed to do whatever you need to customize it to do, and that's why it appeals to these large global corporations, we're going to be looking at software that is designed for municipal government operations, that is designed specifically with our needs in mind, the best practices from 1,500 different agencies across the country combined together in software, doing these things the best possible way to do it and at the most value. So after we got the recommendations from Next Level telling us to look at commercial off-the-shelf Tier 2 software, we prepared an RFP, a request for proposal, to start that process. We issued that RFP in November of 2014. We got 12 responses by January of the following year. We eliminated 6 of those proposals very quickly for non-responsiveness or lack of references. We are looking for software here that is commonly used to do the things that the city needs to do, and it's very important to us that this has been successfully done by other agencies like we will be doing over the next few years. And I'll talk about the other agencies that we've worked with throughout this process. So of the 6 remaining proposals that we received from the RFP, a team of staff, some of whom I've mentioned, plus several other key staff members from finance, HR, and ISD, evaluated the remaining 6 proposals for the following criteria: the acceptance of the city agreement, company qualifications, functionality was the key factor that we looked at, implementation approach, proposed solution, references, and technical requirements. Of those 6, we narrowed that down to the top 3 firms, and we asked them to demonstrate their product remotely over a WebEx for 2 hours for each of those firms. Over those 3 sessions, we narrowed that down to the top 2 firms, and we invited each of those companies to come on site for 4 days each, so a total of 8 days that we spent looking in detail at both of those products. That was in the Perkins Community Room, and it was open to all staff in all of the departments. And in fact, we had overwhelming participation. We had to bring in extra tables and chairs. I would say we had 30 to 40 people in the room at any given time, and sometimes much more. From the various different functions of payroll, budget, all of the items that I mentioned previously. We had multi-hour-long sessions on each of those. We covered a 50-page script where for each of these firms, we asked them, show us, your salespeople have told us that you can do accounts payable for the city, that you can do the budget, that you can produce purchase orders, that you can produce a payroll. Show us how you do that. Walk us through those steps. Allow us to answer questions and give us the answers to those questions. It was a very intense process over a 2-week period. And as a result of that, made it very clear that one of those firms, Tyler Technologies Munis, was the clear choice to move forward. Why was that? Again, over all of the due diligence that I've discussed, all of those 4 days, the hours following the script, it was clear that Tyler Technologies would offer the lowest total cost of ownership, the best end user experience, improved data access and reporting, robust workflow, a citywide system to manage staff time and attendance. That will be an online timesheet system that payroll will use to improve that process tremendously. It is a commercial off-the-shelf system designed around municipal financial best practices, as I mentioned previously. So there are 1,500 agencies across the country that are using Tyler Munis. I'm going to cover some of those agencies in just a moment and how we interacted with them as we validated our decision-making process. In addition, With a company like Tyler, we will have the opportunity to improve our business processes and to reduce risk. So improving the business processes is, again, we'll be using software shared by 1,500 other agencies across the country who have together with Tyler developed the best processes and procedures for each of those functions that every city needs to do. And reducing risk is, again, in our current system with so many customizations, we are reliant on individual programmers and specialized technical staff to keep the system running and to do what we need to do. With a commercial off-the-shelf system, we work with Tyler. We have a company behind that product supporting it, no longer reliant on individuals for particular customized processes. So it didn't end with the selection of Tyler Munis. At that point, we began the validation process, and this started in approximately May or June of this year. We reached out for reference checks by phone with several different cities in the state: Encinitas, Fremont, Hartford, Lodi, Monrovia, Pasadena, Paso Robles, and Santa Barbara. We did research. You can imagine with 1,500 agencies across the country, there are users from each of those cities that participate in a user group that share ideas and information on the product, and we began participating in those groups. We did internet research. We participated in a listserv, which is email communication that these 1,500 agencies do about the product. Then we followed that up with site visits to 2 cities that already run Tyler Munis, Beverly Hills and Culver City. We got 2 different takes from those cities, Beverly Hills and Culver City. We heard positives, we heard negatives. In both cases, the product is implemented and is running, and staff are generally very pleased. We were able to ask questions about Glendale and our process. What would they do differently if they had it to do over again? Could they accommodate the things that Glendale needed to do? Very valuable day-long sessions in each of those cities. Really tremendous of their staff to host a large group of us and work with us all day long, answering our questions and going over their project, giving us advice for what we'll need to do moving forward. Some of the cities just here in California using the product, that's a very long list and I won't read it off. In bold are the larger cities, over 90,000 population. I would say some of the ones we've worked with most closely on that list, Pasadena. Pasadena, as one of the Tri-Cities, is very comparable to Glendale. We have worked with them as they go through their process. They went through a very similar situation as we did, using PeopleSoft, the exact same software that we're using today. A very similar selection process. They came to the same conclusion that Tyler Munis was the right software to run their city. They're about 1.5 to 2 years ahead of us in the process. So we've worked very closely with them through the selection process, through asking, can this software do the many different things that we need to do, like Pasadena? We've worked through all of those things successfully, and we're watching them closely as they continue to move forward with their project. We've also spoken with Santa Monica, who's in the same process that we're in at about the same place. As I mentioned, we visited Beverly Hills and Culver City. I think on this list, someone at each of these cities would recognize one of us from the project team here in Glendale and recognize that they've talked to us recently. We have done our homework. The timeline. As I mentioned, we're already 2 years into this project that started in October of 2013. Assuming we have approval tonight to move forward, we will kick off the project later this fall, this year, probably in 30 to 45 days with a citywide kickoff process. We plan to implement human resources and payroll first. The reason is that it's important when going to a new system in the payroll process. Ideally, you want to do that on January 1st of a given calendar year. For W-2, for tax purposes, that's the ideal date to do that. So we've set the date of January 1st, 2017 as go live for phase 1 of this software, the HR payroll module. After that, we'll begin implementing the financial modules, all the various things I mentioned, over the next 1.5 years, going live in July 1st of 2018. Again, that date chosen because it's the first day of a fiscal year and is the logical date to go live for a citywide financial process. We would most likely go live on the budget module prior to that, around probably November of 2017, so that we can go through the budget process on the new software and be prepared to go live on financials that July 1st on that budget that we conclude before council later that year. So you can see 2 years into this project, we have 3 years of hard work to go. Cost. I want to mention we are currently in contract negotiations with Tyler Munis, almost concluded. I think on all of the major cost issues, we already have agreement, and we're really just buttoning up details at this point. I do want to recognize Damian Patrick and Hagop Hovsepian. Hagop in particular played our bad cop, and it's a role that he played very, very well. And we've so far negotiated the price down by about $1.8 million, so saving the city as much money as possible before we even enter into this process. I also want to recognize Doreen and Jillian, who've been our team from the city attorney's office, working with an aggressive team from Tyler Munis. They do this a lot, 1,500 times across the country. We do this once, usually every 10 to 20 years. And they've been terrific. That team from the city attorney, our bad cop, our good cop, has had tremendous success with this so far.
You play a good one or bad one?
He was the insane cop. Plays by his own rules.
He was a referee.
I think I was the threat behind the curtain that if they can't deal with our good cop, bad cop, and city attorney team, then they may have to deal with me. And fortunately, that has not had to happen. So the estimated 5-year total cost of ownership. The Tyler Technologies contract, this is primarily implementation cost. It takes a lot of staff from the city and from Tyler over a period of 2 or 3 years to set up, configure, and implement this software. That cost is just under $4 million, $3.996 million. $200,000 is Next Level, our consultants that have been with us the first 2 years of this project, to continue with us the next 2 or 3 years and guide us through this project. Contingency amounts of $839,000. Third-party integrations of $75,000. I mentioned the 46 integrations that we do with this system. We will have to, with this new software, touch all of those 46 different systems, and we will have to update those integrations to work with this new software. And so that'll cost a little bit of money, not with Tyler, which is included in that larger figure above, but perhaps with those other software vendors and systems that we work with on their side to integrate with this new software.
And that is for how long? For same length of the contract?
That would be over the next 2 or 3 years.
2 or 3.
So a total of 75. And then staff costs, $2.5 million. That covers primarily our team that we've put together to implement this project. There are a number of ways to approach large projects like this. The way that we have selected, based on some of the experience that Bob's had, that I've had with previous implementations like this, as well as feedback from our consultants Next Level and all of those agencies that we visited or spoke with on the phone, is that we want to use our own staff to be the lead on this project. The reason being that those staff will be here with us after the project is done in future years and keep all of that knowledge and experience with us. So this $2.5 million represents the staff cost for 5 different staff members to work with us over a 3-year period on this project. That will be primarily Jason, Damian, Amy, Art, and several others that aren't here tonight, working with us again full-time on this project over 2 or 3 years. The alternative to this would be to hire more consultants, more temporary employees, more people that are not permanently with the city, which would cost, we believe, an equal amount or possibly more. The disadvantage being that at the end of the project, those temporary employees, those consultants would move on to their next assignment, and we would not retain all of the knowledge and experience that was developed during that time.
And during this next 2 or 3 years, who's going to cover their responsibilities? The staff that are working on this project, Who's going to cover their?
So in some cases, I think that we'll be bringing in backfilled staff. So this amount represents the cost that we'll be funding for those employees to work full-time on this project while the city has staff members doing the work that those individuals normally do.
Because the alternative would be, it's a great question. If you didn't dedicate these folks full-time to work on this, it becomes one more other duty as assigned. And I think the practical experience from our staff that has done a migration to another ERP means that it's going to be fraught with problems. And when the problems exist in an ERP migration, not only are they prolific, but they're long-lasting, because if you miss it on step A, you're probably going to miss it still on step Y as it moves through. So our recommendation last year, or actually a year before last, when we moved in this direction, was to effectively segregate these folks and say, you are the project team, this is your first priority, not all your other work, and then also do this other assignment. So the idea was from early on, you got to have a dedicated team. A great question.
Thank you.
We've heard from our consultant, as well as the cities we visited, as well as the firm, Tyler itself, that does these 1,500 so far implementations, that our approach is the best approach possible. There is no solution that would not result in a staffing cost of roughly equal amount. It's just whether or not we're going to use that on our internal staff or whether we're going to bring in consultants to do that work.
And I will tell you that the references that we had done when folks had problems in their migration, it was because they tried to do it on the cheap with the staff and just say, oh, we're going to stretch just a little bit further, one more thing for everyone to do. And generally, those were the cities that had the worst experiences, regardless of the vendor they used.
So the grand total for the implementation over the next 3 years is $7.6 million. Post-implementation, there'll be ongoing costs, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Those costs will be plugged into future budget years and are not included in the appropriation tonight, but they are included in the contract approval for Tyler and the other firms that we're working with. So of that implementation cost of $7.6 million, we've pre-funded during the 15-16 budget adoption $5.6 million of that funding. That came from property tax proceeds from the redevelopment agency dissolution and was earmarked at that point 2 or 3 years ago when we began this process as seed money for this project. We were estimating that this would cost a little bit more than that, but close to that amount. Indeed, we've come in at 7.6, so we have a balance of $1.9 million additional funding required. We're recommending tonight appropriating that $1.9 million from the ISD application fund net position. ISD does a cost allocation process each year, which we bring before council during the process of budget, and we share with each department every year. We have funding in that fund from prior cost allocation, from depreciation, and from the anticipation of this project, more than the $1.9 million that can cover the balance needed on this. So we're not asking for any new money here. We're asking to appropriate existing funding in the ISD application fund that was acquired in anticipation of doing this project.
And it really is a credit to the council that when the money came in from that dissolution, that initial round of funding from the dissolution of redevelopment, rather than just go spend it and do something with it, you knew that you were going to have to pay this bill, that we were going to, as Brian says, the ERP is 20 years old. We knew that we were going to have to invest significant dollars, whether it was to stay and upgrade with Oracle or PeopleSoft or move in a different direction. But you exercised the discipline, put the money squirreled it away into a separate pocket for this particular project. And as I said at the beginning, to the extent that you've set up this shot for 2 years and you're going to hit it again for the next 3 years, but you've set it up for the last 2 years, and now you're realizing that all those dominoes are falling, and to the credit of Brian and his team, falling in the way that we had anticipated. It really is, it's a credit to the council and to the staff.
Based on that cost, we want to look out 10 years in the future and see how are we doing compared to if we did nothing. So the estimated cost to continue on our current software, PeopleSoft, for years 1 through 5 would be just under $8 million. That includes maintenance, licensing, staffing, those programmers that we rely on to do those customizations, the full cost of that amount of money. We would have to continue running PeopleSoft for the next 3 years during this implementation, where we'll be running effectively 2 systems side by side as we bring the new system up to speed. That will cost us $4.1 million, roughly $4.2. And then the Munis total cost of ownership during the first 5 years will be about $8.5 million. So at the end of 5 years, we will have spent an extra $4.8 million roughly. But it's years 6 through 10, as we consider years 1 through 5 include 3 years of implementation. So we're really almost not finishing the project until most of those 5 years are up. In years 6 through 10, we're done. So the estimated cost during those years, if we continue to rely on PeopleSoft, is $9.2 million. That includes various annual inflators for the cost of maintenance and staff that continue to rise each year. So that's why that number is larger than the first 5 years of the cost that we estimate for PeopleSoft. But we no longer have an implementation. That's a one-time cost. We only have the annual cost of ownership of Munis, which is significantly less than PeopleSoft. So at that point, years 6 through 10, we're almost $7 million ahead on Munis as where we would be today if we did nothing and remained on PeopleSoft. And that means for the full years 1 through 10 cost analysis, it would be $17 million under PeopleSoft, but it will be approximately $15 million to maintain PeopleSoft briefly for 3 years during the implementation, and about $11 million to operate Munis during that time for a savings of $2 million over those 10 years. I would say a couple of things here. I think that the numbers sell this project by itself, but the numbers are not the only story. Some of the other things that I've mentioned about not being reliant on custom code that we have to pay individual programmers to maintain for us, being able to update our business processes to best practice along with 1,500 agencies across the country. Those have tremendous value for the organization that don't necessarily appear here in the cost analysis, but are very important. In addition, this is a very conservative estimate, and I expect we'll do better than this. And the reason is because we really can't just do nothing. Our PeopleSoft implementation is an older version at this point. It's one major version behind current. If we did nothing, we would need to almost immediately begin a process of upgrading PeopleSoft and making that the current version. Because we did a competitive process during this time, we received some proposals to do that very thing during this process, along with Munis and the others that have proposed different systems. So that cost alone would be $3 to $5 million. I can't be more precise because we didn't work closely and thoroughly with those companies proposing those upgrades. But $3 to $5 million, that's not included in any of this cost of ownership over the next 10 years. In addition, you would expect on the same product to do an upgrade every roughly 5 years. So we would do, I think, during the next 10 years, probably 2 upgrades to the current PeopleSoft system in order to stay current. That's $6 to $10 million of additional cost that's not reflected here. So in year 10, our cost of ownership will be $2 million less than doing absolutely nothing on our current PeopleSoft solution. But in fact, that's not really an option. So over those 10 years, we would have to spend $6 to $10 million to keep that system current. And so really, we're looking at more like $8 to $12 million of savings over the next 10 years. I think that's very important for the city. What it means in terms of ISD and how we cost allocate our expenses out to the general fund and all of the enterprise funds, Glendale Water and Power being the largest by far, is that those millions of dollars in savings are money that we will not spend, we will not budget, and we will not cost allocate to the general fund, GWP, or any of our other funds and departments. So that's money that all of our departments, parks and the library, police and fire and the general fund can devote to other things. And it's money that the ratepayers across the city will not need to pay into GWP to cover costs that are coming out of ISD. So that's the critical importance of that process over the next 10 years. In conclusion, the current ERP system, PeopleSoft, is expensive, as we've just talked about, those several $1 million, and long-term support could be problematic. Again, those individual programmers and expensive specialized technical support that we rely on now. During the last 2 years, we've gone through a comprehensive competitive bid process. In addition, after that selection was made, we've done extensive due diligence with a number of other cities, including reference checks, research, and site visits, and come to the unanimous conclusion, both the executive sponsors and the entire team working on this project, that Tyler Munis is clearly the best option for the city to move forward. In addition, I want to mention again, this brings us significant opportunities to improve our business processes and to take full advantage of new technology. That's all that I have tonight. Want to acknowledge again the large team that's been working hard for 2 years on this project. Thank you very much. The work has really not yet begun, so I look forward to 3 more years of hard work with that same team. And I invite any questions from the council.
Any questions?
I have a couple of quick questions. So we don't have any obligations to PeopleSoft, right, as far as contractual obligations to stay with them. So there are no penalties going out of, just cutting that contract off and terminating their contract with us, PeopleSoft.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. And you talked about long-term support. I just want to make sure, I know this company has been dealing with 1,500 different municipalities, but we put our trust in you and your team and our team that the long-term support will be there and this company will be around for another 20 years. Because if they're not around in 12 years, then we're doomed. That's on you guys, because I don't know about that aspect of the business. We put our trust in you. Also, you mentioned Culver City and Beverly Hills, that you had a conversation with them. What was the negative? You said there were positives and negatives. What was it that they didn't like? What is it that they had an issue with?
So several questions, all very good. Thank you, Councilmember Garpetian. I think I want to address first your first question, will the company be around in 20 years? That was one of the key points during our process of initial selection. So some of those, the 4 that we eliminated due to lack of references of the initial 12 proposals, that's why. We're not interested in looking at a company, working with a company that may not be here for the next 10, 20 years, that we need to rely on them. And we're very confident that Tyler will be here for that amount of time and more. In fact, in the time since this process has begun, Tyler has purchased one of the other companies that participated in this process. So that company is no longer an independent company that could offer us a product. I think we've selected the dominant company in this field that will provide the best and longest support during that time frame. So I feel very confident in answering that question. The second question, during the site visits, and more than just the site visits, also the research that we did with several other cities over the phone, we asked, I think when you enter a project like this, you want to know what was the best thing about this project and what was the worst. What didn't work? What should we do differently since we're following in your footsteps? So I mentioned cities like Pasadena, for example, that were 1.5 to 2 years behind. And the answers to that get quite technical. So for example, Beverly Hills brought up a concern that the software is limited to 999 pay codes. That's technical. I apologize. What is a pay code? A pay code is one...
I know what that is, but please explain it to the...
For the audience that I'm sure is waiting with bated breath. A pay code is one particular benefit on one particular paycheck. So if one particular type of employee, for instance, maybe some of the employees in ISD, for example, get a uniform allowance, that's a pay code. How many different uniform allowances are there for the different categories of employees across the city? A large number. So each of those takes up a pay code. When dealing with the roughly 1,500 employees that we're dealing with here in Glendale, several MOUs, the wide variety of different pay types that we use in police, in fire, and across the organization, Each of those uses a pay code. So the concern is, will 999 pay codes be enough to make that system work so that we can generate payroll? Beverly Hills had a concern with that. We followed up with due diligence, looking at our current system. How many pay codes do we use now? Approximately 370 was the answer. So we have a cushion of about 600 pay codes. However, because the way we do it now is not the ideal way we want to do it, some of those pay codes are combined, and in the new system we want to separate those. So we need additional pay codes, but we feel very confident that 999 will be more than enough for us to do what we need to do and continue to issue payroll. So it's a number of examples like that. I'm sure I went into too much detail on that one.
Yes.
Yes.
I was going to mention, we don't need that much detail, but
I apologize, and it's just to illustrate the amount of thoroughness that we've done during this process, and when we've looked at what those negatives might be, what type of thing that is. Nothing obvious that's a big picture negative, those don't exist. The negatives are those detailed technical issues like the pay codes.
Thank you.
Ms. Friedman?
So there must be something in the air, because we just talked about this today at Metropolitan Water District. Same kind of thing. But there the issue was that they had recently gone into contract with a vendor, and I honestly couldn't remember whether it's PeopleSoft or you probably know. But what had happened was that vendor has just come out with a new module, which is a new type of tax module, and they wanted to implement it. It was almost $300,000 to implement that module. That was not expected and not something that they had come to the board previously to appropriate. So, and their explanation to the board was, well, these things happen all the time. You know, they're out there with the software, and companies come in, or agencies come in and say, well, we'd really like the module to do this. So they come out with a new module, and then everyone has to buy it. So my question is, does this include those kinds of changes, or are you going to have to keep coming back to us every couple years and saying, you know what, we said it's this amount, but really they have this new module and it's $300,000 or it's $500,000? Because I think we need to know what we're really getting into financially.
That's a great question. Thank you, Councilmember Friedman. And the answer is that yes, all of those updates and changes are included with Tyler Munis with the new software that we're recommending. So the difference between the software that we use today, PeopleSoft, which runs on Oracle, I think the same software that Metropolitan Water District is looking at, that requires ongoing expense for upgrades. So I mentioned during that 10-year cycle that we're analyzing, probably 2 major upgrades of $3 to $5 million each. And that would keep us coming back to council if we continued with something like a PeopleSoft each time that happened, to appropriate and spend that money. For a Tier 2 solution, for a solution like Tyler Munis that is designed specifically for municipal government finance functions, the software is constantly evolving. We receive monthly updates, and there never is a large update that costs any amount of money beyond the annual maintenance. So in the cost of ownership there, I included the annual maintenance, which is approximately $350,000. It's about $200,000 less than the annual maintenance only cost that we pay on Oracle. And that includes all updates and all patches and all of the things that we'll need over the full operating lifetime, 10 or 20 years of that software.
Okay.
This was something that the bad guys negotiated for, right?
Yes.
Yes, very good. Excellent.
Okay, Ms. Devine?
Okay. Well, I was, we all, 4 of us attended the conference on the League of California Cities, and one of the things that I learned was that in order to maintain a fiscally sustainable city, you have to have 2 things. One is a strong financial system and a very strong IT system in place. And I think this is what we're dealing with right now. I think we are at a place where we can do nothing. We can't do nothing. We have to do something. I want to compliment you and your team on the due diligence. I mean, every step of the way you've just researched everything. I don't know that I could have done a better job. Fantastic. I see a lot of pros, a lot of reasons why we need to do this. I only can find one con, and that is the fact that it's going to take so long. And I questioned that because I thought, wow, this is like, 3 more years? But it's pages and pages of input that it's going to take a lot of time to do. So I think it's I think it sounds like a great project. I think it's something the city needs, and I'm happy that we have you here to guide us through this, because I think you've done a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Devine, and I've been that person behind the curtain, but it's really the project team that's done almost all of the work. I think it's very important, as you said. I think Bob would agree, strong financials and strong IT. This is definitely both of those things. And I do recognize that it sounds unfortunate that it'll take 3 more years of hard work to do this. But as Mr. Ochoa mentioned a little bit earlier, some cities, and we ran into those when we did our due diligence, that have tried to rush this process, that have tried to understaff it. That's been some of those negatives. That's not about the product. That's nothing that Tyler's done wrong. But some of the feedback that we heard from those cities and from our consultant is, don't try to rush this. That will backfire. And so we're not. We're choosing the logical dates, the January 1st date for payroll go live, the July 1st date for financials go live. We're taking the time that it takes to do this the right way, so that we're not back at council asking for anything, so that we're back reporting a successful project, which is what I very much expect.
Very good.
Okay, very good.
Motion, sir.
And if it does come back, he's the bad cop and I'm the good cop, and we'll have to negotiate that. No, I'm very satisfied with the research that was done, with the RFP that was put out, with the evaluation and all the backup contacts that you've done. And it's expensive, but we need to do it. There's no other way around it. And this appears to be the best choice that we have before us. So, can we move all 3 at once?
I'll move the items.
Okay, at 8A, 1, 2, and 3. Is there a second?
Second?
Roll call, please.
Council members Devine?
Yes.
Friedman?
Yes.
Garpetian?
Yes.
Sinanian? Mayor Najarian?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ganley.
Great presentation, sir. Great presentation.
Okay, next item, please.
At 8B is Police Chief regarding competitive process for selecting official police tow services. B1 is resolution approving the request for proposals and authorizing the city clerk to advertise for bids.
Mr. Ochoa.
Yes, sir. Every 10 years or so, we like to go out to bid on the towing contracts. As you know, right now, the contracts that are in place with 3 different towing companies, Monterey Tow, Gaze Towing, and CV Tow, were put out in 2004. So it's that time where we like to go through the RFP process. Chief Castro will give you a very brief presentation on the elements of that RFP with the rules that we are asking the potential proponents, to abide by as we move through what is sometimes a controversial process. So, Chief.
Thank you. What we have done is we put together a comprehensive RFP to go out and solicit vendors that would provide tow services for the city of Glendale. Currently, the city is broken into 3 different towing regions. We have a different tow company for each of those regions to provide sufficient support to not only law enforcement services, but also for the public, so that they have access to their vehicles when they are towed. The RFP has been updated. It follows many of the same rules that were established by the City Council back in 2004 when the original RFP went out. The towing business has gone through a lot of changes over the last 10 years, and laws relating to the towing of vehicles have changed significantly and actually been reduced the number of tows that are commonly done by law enforcement. We will put the RFP out. We believe that we will get a good number of vendors who will be able to compete and that we will then go through an evaluation process to bring back to you a list of vendors who we believe can meet the city's needs for this. This was put together by Carmen Moreno, who did the absolute lion's share of work on this, and she's here with Deputy Chief Povolitis if there are any specific questions in terms of the history of our tow services or what we are asking to go out to RFP bid on now.
Okay, I have a question. Chief, so we're going to stick with the 3 districts then?
That's correct. We did
we
analyze
currently
our needs in those districts, and they still fit. The boundaries are still fit for today as they were when we originally established them.
And then we're going to have one heavy tow, the 3+1, or the heavy
Yes.
tow will be shared by those 3?
Well, in the RFP, if the tow companies that are asking to provide services don't specifically have heavy tow, they have to have the resource to subcontract with another vendor who could provide that. And there are a number of companies right now that provide heavy tow for the Sheriff's Department up on Highway 2 and on our freeways, as we've had some vehicles that have turned over. However, that particular company doesn't have a tow yard within the boundaries of Glendale, so they would be probably one of the subcontractors that the CHP and the Sheriff's Department use.
Okay. Are there any questions?
Yeah, is this RFP for all 3 sections?
Correct. So tow companies can basically bid on any one of the 3 or all 3 if they choose to, and then we would make a selection based on their qualifications and which region we believe they can provide the best level of service to.
Okay. And they all have their own tow yards, or they don't have to have
The
their own?
requirements is they would all have to have their own tow yards, and within the city of Glendale or within a half mile of our boundaries.
Got it. Thank you.
If I may, I wanted to ask why the distance was extended from a quarter mile to a half mile. I don't know if that
We
was
believe that will
discussed.
allow us to get additional vendors that can compete. Because right now, one vendor did go out of business that was doing our heavy tow. And so this will allow us to expand, we believe, the number of tow companies that can compete and have a more open and competitive process.
One of our vendors went out of business?
One that did our heavy tow went out of business, yes.
Okay. Chief, this is always a very, how can I put it, dynamic process when we open this up. I think the city manager likened it to taxi cab and refuse hauling, maybe just third behind taxi cab and refuse hauling in terms of the level of anxiety and lobbying and everything else that goes forth. So I think the strength of the RFP is going to be key to the evaluation and the judging and the selection of the 3. So categories look fine to me. I think the apportionment looks fine. And so that's what we're doing today, is approving this categorical allocation. And what's the time frame then, Chief, for all this?
Our current contracts expire on July 31st, 2016. The RFPs will be due before the end of the year. We will hold an informational meeting at the police department so all vendors can come ask questions for clarification. And we hope to come back soon after the first of the year with our evaluation, our process. We have given ourselves a little bit of room, but we are working under a time constraint to have this all done and approved by the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, and that's when the contract.
Correct. All 3 of the current will, yes, then we would have all the current contracts would expire, and we would implement the new contracts based on the results of the RFP.
Okay, are there any other questions? I don't have any cards on this item. Would someone like to move the resolution at 8B1?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Council members Devine?
Yes.
Friedman?
Yes.
Garpetian? Sinanian? Mayor Najarian?
Yes. Next item, please.
8C is Director of Human Resources regarding establishment of classification titles and compensation for employees. C1 is resolution for Glendale City Employees Association Memorandum of Understanding, including confidential and hourly classifications. 2 is resolution for Glendale Management Association Memorandum of Understanding, including employee relations exempt classification. 3 is resolution for appointed executive level employees.
Mr. Ochoa.
Yes, sir. Just very briefly, periodically departments will approach the Department of HR and talk about the classifications that they have, particularly in looking at a series from an entry-level type of position all the way through the matriculation up to a management or more senior position. What you see before you is our request to add in classifications both in the non-management and then one in the management ranks. The non-management positions represented by GCEA are Police Services Assistant, Power Systems Associate, Transit Associate, all representing entry-level positions for those series. The GMA position is Transit Analyst. Additionally, there is one alteration we're requesting as it pertains to the fire chief position and aligning its classification or its compensation with the police chief position. Right now, they are out of whack between the two of them, so we want to put those into a balanced alignment between them. But if you have any specific questions about those positions, how they came through the departments, Mr. Doyle certainly can answer those. This is a non-cost item except for the adjustment to the chief's classification because we are adding classifications, but we aren't necessarily adding bodies. These are positions that ultimately could be filled in all likelihood by existing personnel.
So we're not adding new positions. We're just...
These are classifications only, not bodies.
And no salary is?
Other than for the chief's position, the fire chief's position.
Right. Okay.
Got it.
Okay. I don't have any cards on this item, on 8C. Is there a motion?
Move the item.
Second.
Roll call.
Council members Devine,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Garpetian,
Yes.
Sinanian, Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Next item, please.
Next item at 8D is Director of Community Development regarding artificial turf and drought-tolerant landscaping on private property and in parkways, state model water efficient landscape ordinance. D1 is a motion initiating amendments to zoning ordinance for amend landscape chapter of zoning ordinance and adopt model water efficient landscape ordinance and directing staff to return with an ordinance amending Title 12 of the Glendale Municipal Code 1995 relating to parkway standard.
Mr. Ochoa.
Yes, sir. By way of brief preamble, what we are requesting tonight is direction from the council as to which direction you would like us to go as we prepare an ordinance that deals with this confluence of the landscaping standards for residential properties juxtaposed to drought conditions that we are all having to deal with, juxtaposed to changes in state law, all while trying to keep some semblance of neighborhood compatibility in a way that's fair and reasonable to as many people as possible. With that, we'll have Phil give you a brief introduction, and he has his team talking about the work that's been done to date based on council's previous direction and where we would like to go with recommendations and study from our consultant as well as our staff. Phil?
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, we've talked about this item before in 2008 and 9, came back again in 2011, and then May of this year, and you asked us to go look at standards to include artificial turf or to allow artificial turf, I should say, in light of some of the drought conditions that we've experienced. In addition to that, at the time, you had asked us to look at our drought landscaping standards as well. Currently, Glendale has landscape standards that require drought-tolerant planting. We look at the front setback area. That's predominantly where it is in residential. Half of that needs to be covered with live plant material. That's kind of the big picture. This discussion, the borders or boundaries of this discussion really got narrowed and identified with Assembly Bill 1164, which the governor signed Friday. That prohibits local government from prohibiting artificial turf. So the conversation no longer is do we or don't we, rather it's how much and to what degree of quality do we establish in our code. What we've tried to give you today, and to put this in a little bit of context, is something that there are images, there are ranges, so that as part of the conversation, we can start to narrow what it is you're looking for in terms of, again, coverage, quality, things of that nature, with both drought-tolerant landscaping and artificial turf. As we were putting this together in our recommendations and suggestions, we were trying to accomplish three things. We want this to be easy to understand so that people that are doing this and currently doesn't require a permit to landscape, we want to make sure that they understand what it is they can and can't do so that as they go forward, they're doing it the way that our code is asking them to do. We want it to be easy to administer so that your staff can get these things through, these projects through quickly and with relative ease. And then finally, we want it to be easy to enforce. Right now, we've got to go out and take a ruler and measure, do we have 50% plant coverage? We wanted to set some standards that would be easy to recognize and easy to enforce, measure and then enforce. So putting those things together, again, we've given you, as part of the presentation that Tim will give to you, we've given some ranges, we have given some images, and what we would like from you is direction on how you would like us to craft, based on those images and those ranges, craft an ordinance that would come back to you in about a month. So with that, I'll turn it over to Deputy Director Tim Foy.
Good evening. So the background on this is that the council adopted phase 3 of water conservation in April, back in May, as Phil mentioned. And in July, the state released a model water efficient landscape ordinance, which also factors into this. And then, of course, AB 1164, which was just mentioned as well. These things are fairly consistent with each other, but they address different aspects. So, as Mr. Lansfay mentioned, the action tonight is that you do not have any ordinance to adopt or introduce tonight. We were asked, when we initiated this, to come back so that council could set the general parameters before we went to the Planning Commission for some fine-tuning. So this ordinance that is written after tonight's presentation will come back to you one more time. So our current regulations, as Phil mentioned, is that in the single-family zones, which is where a lot of the interest lies, is that of the total lot area, 40% must be landscaped, although our definition of landscape in the code includes things other than live plant material. So half of that 40% of the total lot area has to be plants, and the street setback areas have to be 50% live plants. And these are the regulations in the other zones. Multifamily zones vary a little bit from each other. In the commercial and industrial zones, C1 and C2 have some very small setbacks, which you have to landscape if you don't do anything else with them. Otherwise, there are no required landscape setbacks, although all of these do have requirements for planting and surface parking lots. And the mixed-use zones generally are about 10% of the lot area. I'm not sure about the DSP. Perhaps you changed that just this afternoon. So the enforcement of the regulations now, you don't need a permit. However, there are standards in the code that must be met. So that kind of speaks to the need to keeping the standards simple if we follow that, because it's just easier for people to unwittingly run afoul of regulations if they're not required to get a permit first.
But how would you enforce it if
We do enforce,
if the zoning standards in code must be met and there are no permits? How do we know that there are 27,000 single-family homes and you don't have permit process?
Right. Well, this is the way we enforce a lot of things through code enforcement is either the code enforcement officers driving by spot something which is severely out of whack, or we receive a complaint call.
Complaint.
It's out of compliance with the code, not necessarily in violation of a permit, because you don't necessarily need to have a permit to have a violation for the condition of your property. And so, but there are code standards, minimum standards for property maintenance. If you're out of alignment with the code standard, then a complaint can be generated and enforced.
It's going to be almost all complaint-driven.
Complaint-driven, yeah.
Well, and I will tell you that in the wake of our downsizing over the last several years, we have gone from proactive code enforcement to almost entirely reactive code enforcement. And that's basically the staffing levels that we have in code enforcement today.
Thank you.
Okay. Landscape which is approved by DERB must remain in place at least for a little while. And the only time you need a permit to re-landscape is when you're adding irrigation valves, and that requires a building permit. Or plumbing, I should say, probably. Then there's the enforcement, or lack of enforcement, which is mandated by the water emergency phases. Failure to maintain landscaping is not a violation of the code if it is due to compliance with one of the water conservation phases in Title 13, which we are currently in, obviously. So let me go first, cover briefly the state model ordinance. We are required to adopt it or something very similar, something stricter. For all its complexity, it ends up having limited applicability. It only applies to residential areas. If you're building a new structure and you have to go to DRB, it'll probably apply to you. If you're just rehabbing a landscape and you're not pulling a permit, because you're not doing it as a requirement of DRB, or you're not pulling a building permit for that, you need to have a very large area in order for this to kick in. And there aren't that many properties in Glendale that are going to have 2,500 square feet of landscape being redone if it's not in connection with new construction. And it also allows some high water turf, which is a little bit in conflict with our Phase 3 restrictions, which say that you have to have all drought-tolerant landscaping. Legally, you can't have both exist at the same time. Obviously, we want to be able to, as much as we can, project a clear and unconfusing message to our constituents. So this is what's involved in the state model ordinance analysis. It's quite extensive. Many of these things require their own professional to do. Staff does not have people who can vouch or check these. I don't believe that we have a landscape architect on staff. Certainly community development doesn't. And we are recommending this just be done through self-certification. And actually the way the state model ordinance is written, it really leans that way already. Part of the state model ordinance says you have to submit things from licensed professionals attesting that you have met these requirements. So I think the state kind of anticipates self-certification. Moving on to AB 1164, which Phil described earlier. It too applies only to residential uses, interestingly enough. So we do already allow artificial turf in the R1 zones, and we have to allow it in the other residential zones. And we cannot impose standards that significantly raise the cost. And this is a kind of a young field. There are many more products coming online that we've discovered recently. Costs in some cases are actually going down. So I think for the moment I feel confident that we have leeway to impose reasonable standards and not run afoul of significantly raising costs. We did hire a consultant to do some analysis on the benefits and impacts of artificial turf versus drought-tolerant landscaping. We were well into this report when Mr. Gatto's bill came to light and started speeding through the legislature, so it's kind of taken a lot of the wind out of the sails of that. And really what is most useful in this report right now is that there are pretty good recommended standards for the use of artificial turf and recommendations for drought-tolerant landscaping. So it still has proved to be a useful report. It was done by Rescape, and The consultants are in the audience tonight and are available to answer any questions if council chooses. So generally what we would like you to consider tonight are the standards for drought-tolerant landscaping with or without artificial turf, and does it make sense to lower the percentage of coverage for those? More topics on the use of artificial turf itself, those 4 bullet points there. And we also added in standards for parkways, the area between the sidewalk and the curb, because that has been also a source of a lot of public discussion, and it'd be good to nail that down and have it be consistent with what else we're doing. So drought-tolerant landscaping, our current regulations that we described work pretty well for water-intensive plantings. The measurements that we are required to make are easy to do when you have someone rolling out sod and kind of planting an instant garden as opposed to waiting for something to grow in. I think a lot of people find that drought-tolerant plantings can appear natural even with wider spacing and maybe a little bit of less coverage than you would see with water-intensive plantings. Although you can have densely planted drought-tolerant landscaping and it can look really, really good. I'm certainly don't mean to discourage that. So these are some samples of high coverage. These are from Glendale, I'm happy to say. And these probably meet or exceed the 50% coverage in the street setback that we now expect for all kinds of landscaping. These are probably a more moderate level of coverage. We kind of eyeballed the one on the left at 25%. We didn't really trespass onto the property to measure it, but as we go forward to Planning Commission, if council's inclined to this direction, we will do more specific measurements to get a more precise number. But we believe it about 25% coverage. The building on the right is actually, I think, in an industrial zone along Thompson.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
When you're talking about coverage, you're talking clearly about the coverage right now, right? Because some of these are new gardens with plants that will spread.
Right.
Did you think about is there any thought about judging coverage by the ultimate size that these plants will grow, not about?
Yeah, that's definitely doable. We could ask a landscape architect to submit 2 versions of the plans, one showing it now and one showing it at maturity. So that is an option to consider, yes.
Okay.
But that's also another reason why perhaps having lower coverage initially might end up looking like fuller coverage just a few years down the line. And these are some samples of fairly low coverage. So this is what we will ask council to point us in a direction on, if you can come to some conclusion on that. So these are the consultant. For drought-tolerant landscaping, their recommendations really just mirrored that in the state model ordinance. Some of the other options that council could consider are maintaining the 50% coverage at planting or lowering it, and also one city had kind of an intriguing idea of requiring plants to be evenly spaced by putting a maximum distance between them. So you can either discuss these now or wait till the end of my presentation. Okay.
Is this a break point? This is for the drought tolerant.
Yeah. If you would like to give us a direction for drought tolerant now, or we can summarize at the end.
Well, Mr. City Attorney.
Say if you are going to give direction on part of it, then you would need to take public comment before you do that. So I don't know how you want to handle that, but you would need to hear from the public before you gave direction on a particular item.
I have to ask them, what if the comment encompasses both? I think we should probably go forward.
Okay, very good. So this is kind of the meat of the presentation, the characteristics of artificial turf, and this is where the consultant's report was really very useful. They identified a number of these. We added one more, and the very last bullet came actually from the initial council discussion to consider standards for installation as well. So they come in a variety of colors. You can get single colors, and I think probably the premium brands have 3 colors. These images I took from a supplier's website, and that supplier told me that there actually was appreciably no cost difference between them. So that's good.
Between single color and 3 colors?
Right.
Cost difference, is it?
Yeah, not a significant one. We can check more suppliers as we go forward, just to be sure.
Sure, Mr. Najjar.
So some of the ideas we had about this were you could always require multiple colors. The multiple colors obviously imitate a natural lawn better. Shows some which appears to be dead or dying grass and some color variation. We did have an idea, which we'll come to later, about requiring a border along the sidewalk. If council was inclined to allow just a single color, perhaps it might be more appropriate. If you were also requiring a border, that might provide some visual distraction, I guess. Or council could simply choose not to regulate color at all. Let a USC fan have cardinal and gold and things like that. I will say one other thing we would like to cover in our eventual ordinance is whether people can apply paint to dead grass. So we probably will be recommending against that, but we're open for council's input. So the length and the texture. These also came from the supplier's website.
And is there a difference in price with length, texture?
I'm not sure about this, but I will get to a photo of a sample board from Home Depot, which seems to show very little difference in price. Good. So obviously, what the consultant recommended was 1 5/8" blades, as well as form that has a spine to help it stay upright, and having tops which are cut at a diagonal, not just all uniform crew cut. So again, these sorts of options, here's a Home Depot sample board, and you can see that the ones that are most like a putting green, what we might call a matte or a thatched texture, are at the bottom. And they don't seem to be any more expensive than some of the longer ones in the middle row. The one at the top, I think, did not have a price, unfortunately. Kristen tried her best to get them to loan that to us so council could see it, but no go. So again, these are the sorts of things council could choose from for parameters for this. And then here's some pictures of the use of borders here. I think these are not from Glendale. These are from Burbank. And at least on our staff level, people reacted pretty favorably to the one on the left, which is maybe about 3 or 4 feet deep there. It probably would catch your eye and maybe let you kind of, so to speak, get away with a less expensive version of turf behind it. We didn't think that the border along the driveway was very useful aesthetically. And this is a diagram of how coverage in a front yard setback would be if you had borders. The consultant recommended a 3-foot border planting against the house, kind of up at the top. And it turns out that the pictures of houses that we took here in Glendale, people just naturally did that anyway. They had a border of live plants, even if they had artificial turf coming all the way to the sidewalk. So it's something that people seem to be drawn to, so we included that, a 3-foot border, a suggestion of a 3-foot border at the sidewalk towards the bottom of the picture there. That leaves 19 feet of width, which you could maximally have artificial turf with, and that would be 76% coverage of that street setback area. 25 feet is the required street setback area in R1, and it's actually the very typical setback as well, building setback. So here are some of the options. You could keep the live plant material and allow most or all of the remainder to be artificial turf.
I'm sorry, Mr. Foy. Could you back up to that last slide? Okay, so in that example, turf is 76%,
That's
and
right.
live plants are 24%.
Right. 19 over 25, and then 6 over 25. We don't count the driveway. We won't count a walkway if they have one.
So if we pass an ordinance that says you have to have, you can have up to 76% artificial turf, that would comply with that requirement.
We would probably also recommend that no other type of hardscape be allowed, that you couldn't substitute concrete for the artificial turf in that 76%.
Concrete?
A couple of things, though, to just as you're formulating the idea. This would be the example if there was no other landscape in the yard. But one of the standards that we want to introduce is no turf under a tree, and there are reasons for that Mr. Foy would get to. So in this example, if you had a tree, you wouldn't be able to put turf under that, so you'd be much less than 76%, depending on how big that tree is.
How do you calculate that tree, the amount of percentage that the tree is in the yard? How's that calculated?
We wouldn't calculate it as a percentage of the yard. What we would do is look up the expected canopy at mature growth, and then the drip line where the roots reach out to is maybe about 2 feet beyond that. So all or some of that probably should not be compacted, have the soil dug up and compacted, because that will really harm the tree.
Right.
So we would just say, don't put artificial turf there because we don't want you compacting the soil. So we wouldn't translate it into a percentage.
I guess the point
It's
for
not
this,
necessary.
with this slide and this diagram, is to not get caught up with percentages, but rather standards. So if you have a 3-foot border at the building and a 3-foot border at the sidewalk, we know what you can put in there. You can put turf in between that. If you have a tree, we don't have to calculate the percentage. We know that it's got to be at least 2 feet outside the canopy, which is the drip line where the roots get out to. So that kind of goes back to that easy to understand, easy to administer, easy to enforce. We're just looking at borders, and now you can very quickly see it's 3 feet. You can very easily judge that it's 50% landscape, and you know whatever's inside can be turf. If you have a tree, you know when you're looking at it, it can't be within that canopy line.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes, I think what we're missing here is the width of the lot, because that 3 feet in the front and 3 feet in the back, that's fine. But the width, we're considering it like to be 25 feet. Most of the lots in Glendale are 50 by 150, for example. If you have a 10-foot wide driveway, that will leave you 45 feet of turf, the width, and 19 feet long, right? So that would be more than 75 or 76%. And we have lots that are 120 feet wide, and they're on a corner. So I don't think it's just this little standard here, 3 feet in the front and 3 feet in the back, is you can calculate the percentage of the front lot. If you have 100 feet, the width of your property is 100 feet, and then you have a driveway of 12 feet, then it's going to leave you 88 feet. And the entire length, that some of the houses are not sitting back 25 feet from the street. They sit back 45 feet from the street. So I think we need to be very careful with diagrams like this to mention what the width of this property is. Other than that, it's very difficult to...
There's no width dimension, actually.
There is no width dimension. That's what I'm saying. I mean, most of this, the way it's written, the width of this property is maybe 35 feet because 25 foot of turf and 10-foot driveway. But if your property is 50 feet wide, then you have 40 feet.
Well, if you consider it as a ratio of how much is what width is artificial turf versus what depth is artificial turf versus what depth is live plant material in the borders, that ratio stays the same no matter how wide it is. But you do raise a good point, but we didn't consider about corner lots. We'll have to check that.
I don't want to get caught up in percentages, but I think it will be different. But let's move forward.
Right.
Move on.
So this is just one option for council to consider. This isn't, although I drew it up as a diagram, I don't mean to say that this is staff's recommendation. We are required to allow artificial turf in all our residential zones. A lot of the impacts are being reduced, but there are some impacts of artificial turf that will always remain. It's difficult, as you know, it's not permeable. It doesn't provide the ability of the soil underneath to sequester carbon. I mean, it's hard to measure how important those things are, but there will always be, runoff from this. So I don't want to convey extra importance just by having drawn the diagram. But just for explanatory purposes. So some of the options council could consider would be to keep the 50% live plants in the front setback and allow most of the rest of it to be artificial turf. We are suggesting the border of live plants at the building. I mentioned before, no other hardscape if you're going to allow artificial turf in the front yard. And if council was inclined to allow turf up to the sidewalk, you might want to consider having the more realistic looking blade grass instead of the mat or thatch type. They're just things to consider. And in the other zones...
Sorry, can you go back one slide?
Sure.
When you say 50% live plants, 40% artificial turf, right now we have to have 40% landscape, right, on the entire site?
Entire lot area, right.
Right. So out of that 40%, you're recommending 50% live plant and 40% artificial turf.
Right. Actually, that first bullet, I was thinking of just the street setback, the required street setback.
The required street setback, that 25 feet setback.
In the R1 zone, right.
All right.
So some of these might conflict with each other. These are just a range of options for council to consider. So in the other zones, the multifamily zones, and if you choose, commercial and mixed-use zones, these again are options. You could either just say it's not permitted in the public right-of-way, when visible from the public right-of-way, or again, you could try to allow it if there was a plant border. The landscaping requirements in parking lot, especially the trees, requirement for trees really helps shade parking lots. I probably would personally recommend that we not allow artificial turf in tree wells because it's just going to hurt the trees so much and they're so valuable in parking lots. As well, sometimes we have required landscape buffers next to residential, 5 feet along the edge. So the council could consider making that all real plants. Under trees, this is a picture, I think from Burbank, where someone has planted artificial turf all the way up to the edge of a tree there.
Probably they nailed it to the tree.
I don't want to guess.
More stable.
So every manufacturer suggests compacting soil, which is just going to harm tree roots. We don't want to do anything to discourage planting of trees, especially in parkways. Certainly the indigenous tree ordinance would seem to forbid it. We would set up a conflict there if we allowed artificial turf under indigenous trees. And again, this is just what it would look like under one scenario if you showing the drip line being a little farther out than the tree canopy. Whatever percentage of artificial turf you allow would be a maximum and could be reduced effectively by planting around a tree.
Is that still your 76% there, or is
No.
that's a different calculation?
It still has a 3 feet
That would
border.
be something less than 76% because you couldn't put it under the tree. So if there's no tree there, it would be 76%. Again, we don't need to know what the percentage is. We can look, if this is the standard you adopt, we can look at the tree and say the turf is outside that drip line.
So most of the landscape architects and arborists that I've spoken to would recommend the first bullet. One landscape architect suggested the second one as possible compromise, and then council could, if you so choose, just protect only the indigenous trees that we already protect. Okay, installation. Areas that are over 25% slope will be tricky. Our recommendation there probably would be to have a civil engineer or geotech engineer supply a grading plan to make sure that it's going to stay presentable, that the backing especially, the base, stays there. There are a couple of different contractors' licenses that could install this, and council could go for a landscape contractor's license, or there's another one called synthetic products license. Obviously, those would help ensure quality installation, hopefully. But it's up to us whether we want to require them or not.
25% slope is how many degrees? Like 12 degrees?
Well, it would be, I believe, 1 foot rise over 4 foot run. So 22 degrees maybe, Rubik?
1 foot rise for every 4.
100% slope is 1 to 1. That's 45 degrees.
Yeah, so it's probably maybe 10%, 12%. And also for parkways, again, we kind of added this in. Here's some suggestions, develop with the public works staff of things that would be, keep the city out of trouble, keep the parkways usable for people. 6 foot high limit for plants. I'm sorry, 6 inches. Oops. They were concerned about gravel, small, loose rock, bark and mulch, even though they are popular to use.
Can I ask a question? Why 6 inches outside of the ratio of where a door opens? I mean, isn't the idea of 6 inches so that you can open a door and get out?
Car door.
Car door?
Car door.
So if you have a parkway that's wider than that, why do you have to go beyond that, whatever it is, 3 feet or something, with the 6 inches?
Councilmember Friedman, that's a good question. Actually, the purpose of 6-inch limitation is for people to be able to access the sidewalk or properties from the street. So after they get out of the car, if the car is parked immediately adjacent to the curb, or if they're walking in the street and they want to cross through the parkway onto the sidewalk. So they don't have to take a quantum leap.
Right.
Big jump.
I understand you want people to be able to get through, but I mean, it is a little unreasonable for parkways that you have a 6-inch limit all the way across, because you can easily have a couple of larger things that people can easily get past. I know we don't generally enforce on people that do that, but why write a code that 90% of the city or 80% of the city is not going to follow anyway? I mean, why not just say you want it so that people have access and can get through and kind of say no cactus, no whatever?
That's a valid point, and if that's your direction, that's how we'll implement
Because I mean, there's
it.
a lot of 6-inch stuff right now that, like rocks, that you really can't walk across, that are just unsafe.
Right, so rocks are eliminated from the code.
So that's something we can talk about.
Absolutely.
I have one
And
question for Ruby.
Mr. Garbettian, then Ms. Devine.
What about the properties that already removed their turf and drop big rocks on the parkway, especially. What are we in a position to enforce that, or what are we going to do with that?
Councilmember Garpetian, currently, in the absence of an ordinance, we don't have a mechanism to enforce those requirements. So everything's temporarily on hold until such time that the City Council adopts an ordinance, and so we can enforce it.
So our current ordinance does not prohibit the homeowners to take out their lawns and put rocks in there, or big boulders?
Currently, there is no parkway landscaping ordinance in effect.
There isn't? There's no state? There's no nothing? Because I know citizens that have had people from the city tell them to take things out.
Yeah, I thought that there was you couldn't put hard surface on the parkway?
So, yeah, council members, Mayor Najarian, we have had a practice in order to safeguard the pedestrians from tripping hazards when there are obvious interactions that will preclude them or create tripping hazards. We have asked the property owners, you're absolutely right, to take them out immediately. But for what would replace it, currently there is no set of standards and ordinance except for what we have practiced in the past. But we will bring that ordinance, the recommended ordinance, for adoption and consideration in the near future, and we'll be able to enforce it.
Let's continue.
Anything else, Mr. Pine?
So these are some pictures of parkways that probably would be allowable under the suggested standards we just reviewed. And these are things which would not be. You'll note this here is wood chips on the left.
If you go, would you go back to the last slide, please? And this goes back to the 6-inch plants. Those look like they're higher than 6 inches, and I agree with Councilmember Friedman that if you space them like that, it looks nice, and I think you can open car doors, you can walk across. Question about that.
We are not recommending artificial turf in parkways because a couple of reasons. It's implementation. If we just rely on people to install it themselves, that can leave the city open to some liability. Again, we don't want to do anything to discourage street trees. And also, it's pretty incompatible with pet waste because it will have to be hosed down and run off into the storm drain system.
So you said they will be hosed down and...
Most likely, I mean, unfortunately, there are people walking their dogs who don't pick up after their pets.
Which is a violation in and of itself.
Pets are normally going to relieve themselves in the parkway. That's typically where it happens.
And it doesn't biodegrade the way it does on grass, so it just stays there.
Right. So even if somebody does pick it up and remove it, there's still some that may be washing it down. So we'd rather not be in the parkway for the reasons outlined. Number one, we have a lot of trees in our parkways, and we don't want to damage any of those roots. Simple, practical things like whenever Public Works comes by and repairs a sidewalk, you may have to cut a little bit of turf to get in and do the work you need to do. They can replace live turf very easily.
Sure.
They can cut it out and put it back. If you were to do that with artificial turf in the parkway, you just can't get to it. Pets relieving themselves. For a variety of reasons, installation, is it done right? If it's done on your property and somebody trips on it, that's on you. If it's done in our parkway, that could perhaps be on us. And Mr. Garcia can tell you more about that. For all those reasons, we just recommend don't allow it in the parkway.
And another reason is that if we damage it when doing sidewalk repair, we may not be liable legally to fix it, but it is our habit now, I understand, to do minor repairs on irrigation systems and parkways that we damage at no cost to the owner. So it's probably another good reason to shy away from turf in the parkway.
So what we're looking for today is some direction from you on those different areas. And our next slides will summarize that. Once we get that, we'll put it into an ordinance fashion. We'll include the state model, we'll include parkway standards, bring it back to the Planning Commission because it will be an ordinance zoning code, and then we'll return back to you with that in ordinance fashion. So if we can, run through quickly a summary of the things that we've talked about. Tim, go to the next slide. And if you can kind of give us your thoughts, your direction on the drought tolerant standards. This is without artificial turf. In that 50% of street setback, you want 50% live plant material, something less than that, maximum distance. These are standards that we're suggesting to you so that you get some form of landscape that you're comfortable with that may not be turf. So in terms of that front setback, you want 50%, which it currently is. Would you like to try something less than 50%?
Okay, so why don't we go through this, because what we'll do is take public comment. Okay. And so you're going to you're framing the issues for us to discuss once we're at that point. So that's the drought tolerant.
Yeah, this is just this is really just a repeat of everything you've seen.
Artificial turf.
And that will need color, length. You want us to have spine, diagonal cut. The next slide. The next decision we'll need is artificial turf coverage. You want to set a coverage amount, percentage. You want to set standards like borders and nothing under the tree canopy. You want to allow to go all the way to the sidewalk, in which case we would recommend yet a different standard for quality. And then finally, in other zones, we need your input on those standards.
Which is the parkway? Is that
the other zones would be multifamily, industrial, commercial.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We have two speakers. Let's hear from them, and then we can take council comment. Okay, Robert Sjoquist. 3 minutes, please.
3 minutes? I'm in this industry. I'm in the native grass and native seed industry. And 11 years ago, I started a partnership with Caltrans from an $80,000 grant they gave us to create grasses from native California seeds that were here before the 1830s called legacy seed. And we have 5 varietals that we've been on the market with for over 10 years that take 50 to 60% less water than common fescues do and qualify for most of the water cash for grass rebate programs and what have you. You could go to the Huntington or any Starbucks in Southern California and see one of our varietals called Mow Free. This is at the Riverside Conservation District Demonstration Garden. I have several thousand plantings across Southern California of that group of plants. We also have a new product we're just coming to market with called Carapia. It's a plant that originated in Japan. It's about the only plant that lives in Dubai, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. We have test plantings in Palm Springs and Borrego Springs with 0 water all summer. They stay green just like this the entire time. They take about 90% less water than a common fescue. Why I bring these up is there's a ton of options out in the world if people would just open their computers and look, other than the synthetic turf. The Long Beach Landscape Expo, which has been running for 14 years, 2 years ago there was 2 artificial turf people there. This year there were 41. When you start talking about artificial turf, you're talking about synthetic stuff that the manufacturing public is going to make cheaper and cheaper and cheaper for the buying public to buy. Your standards are going to have to change with the sophistication of those people taking advantage of the broad term artificial turf. It kills everything underneath it. You're going to end up with areas devoid of any bacterial or fungi in your soil. Your soils are going to compress. Your pHs are going to come up. You're going to see lawsuits neighbor to neighbor from flow coming off of one property that's artificially turfed. The other one has a gardenia garden that's 3 generations old that just got wiped out from the salinity and the wash that came underneath that turf during a high rain event. Don't even get me started with El Nino. This, to me, is a little bit crazy that you guys are even talking like this, an astute group such as yourself, but you don't probably know, because this isn't your world, what you're really walking into here. DWP, their Cash for Grass program, they gave over $90 million to turf terminators to put gravel down. And now that under high rain events, that gravel's washing into storm drains, and people are getting fined for blocking storm drains and causing downstream problems just from that little program. So just think long and hard about what all of this really means 10, 15, 20 years from now, especially as this stuff starts to biodegrade and what landfill is going to accept it when it's a petrochemical thing that's half biodegraded. Think about dew coming up out of the ground because the earth sweats. That's what it does. Evapotranspiration gets trapped under this stuff. Bacteria gets formed. Funguses get formed that are alien to the area. So that I just wanted to I came down here from Camarillo tonight to put my voice out to just think about.
Thank you.
A big topic. It's a big, big topic. It isn't just blue, green, purple, or USC color AstroTurf. It's our ground, and there's a lot of options for people. None of these cost half of what a square footage cost of the cheapest AstroTurf, and the ones that take super little water, are a very viable option.
Would you leave your information with the city clerk, please?
Sure.
And don't leave yet, okay?
Yeah.
Sharon Weissman.
Thank you. Mayor Najarian, council members, and staff, I'm Sharon Weissman from far north Glendale. I'm speaking tonight as an individual. I really appreciate the city staff's work on this issue. It's apparent that a lot of effort went into it. And although the state has now made it impossible to continue the ban on front yard artificial turf, I want to remind everyone that just because something is legal doesn't make it the right thing to do. I urge everyone considering changing their yard to save water to look at all the natural drought-tolerant options that have been presented and consult the resources noted on the city's website for California native plants, and of course talk to Theodore Payne Foundation. There are so many beautiful ways to replace thirsty lawns with living material or natural ground coverings such as bark or mulch that are much more friendly to the earth and those of us living on it than anything made out of a toxic petroleum product. I urge the council to adopt ordinance changes that encourage sustainable, natural alternatives over anything artificial. Please allow only what the state rules require and don't promote any fake grass. I concur with the staff's recommendation to not allow painting of dead turf. When I read that, I thought, wow, I thought they could never come up with anything worse than cheap plastic grass. But painting dead grass. Wow. Anyway, we do live in the shadow of Hollywood, and there's a lot of phony glitter and glitz bombarding us, but I hope we can really keep Glendale yards real. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I don't have any other cards. So, Mr. Garbettian. Are you ready to go, or do you want?
I'd like to hear what my colleagues have to say first, because I know Ms. Friedman has a lot of information. So do I, but I want to hear her first.
Well, I just don't know what we're doing here. I really don't. Actually, the gentleman who spoke said a lot of what I was going to say, but I'll say a little more. We are in a drought. But we have an even bigger crisis that we're facing, which is climate change. And plants of all kinds are one of the #1 ways that we can help in our own little ways to soften climate change, soften the effects by cooling the air, by cleaning the air through with the oxygen that plants provide. And these are very real things. The heat island effect, when you look at the temperatures in cities, compared to temperatures away from all of those buildings and hardscape is a huge difference. That's why when you go out into the woods, it's cooler than when you're in a city because there's all this hardscape. Having plants is something that keeps that temperature down, something we should all care about right now, given what the temperatures have been and what they're projected to be going into the future, where NASA is telling us that we're going to be having more and more and more days over 100 degrees in Southern California because of climate change. And artificial turf can heat up beyond even what pavement does, contributing to that heat island effect. Plants cool things, they clean the air. This does none of that. There's no way of us regulating what's in it because there's no standards. The only testing that's done is done by the artificial turf industry itself. We know that what's out there now, a lot of it's made of recycled tires that has toxins, plastics. All of those are materials that do leach chemicals into the ground. They do. And we don't know what the effects of all those chemicals going into the soil and into the groundwater is. Why would we experiment with that? Why would we take that chance if we don't have to? And we don't have to. That's what's so incredible about this conversation. Every single thing that we want artificial turf to do is done better in the residential setting by plants, by the grasses the gentleman talked about, and even by dirt is better, or decomposed granite. Certainly cooler. Plants provide a habitat for bugs, which perform important roles for birds, for wildlife, and yet we're talking about replacing all that with plastic and rubber, possibly filled with chemicals. We don't know. And all we want to talk about up here is aesthetics. The aesthetics are the least of our problems with this product. This is just bad policy. You know, we went through a lot here to ban plastic bags, and now we want to try to cover the city in plastic. This makes no sense to me whatsoever. None. There's no justification for it. There's no reason for it. You know, we're going into a big unknown with products we don't know anything about in a completely unregulated area. And we know right away that we're taking things that are positive, being live plant materials, and taking them out of our neighborhoods. That is just wrong. It's just wrong on every single level. This is an overreaction. There's been a lot of articles recently in the LA Times from a lot of experts talking about how the deadscaping of Los Angeles is the last thing we should be doing in a drought. We're seeing wholesale die-offs of trees because people aren't watering them. This product put near trees kills them. And by the way, it sterilizes and kills the ground. So if you put this product in and you remove it a year later, let's say you don't like it, guess what? You can't plant. You would have to remove all of your dirt and replace it because the dirt is dead. Every microbe has been killed. It's not aerated, the pH is off, you cannot plant. So if you buy one of these houses that had this product and you try to take it out and plant, guess what? You've got to dig, 10 feet of dirt out and replace it? So how are we going to deal with that disclosure when we start enforcing on people who take it out and try to plant and then they have, dead there? Are they going to go and sue the previous homeowners? Enforcement. We're talking about enforcing quality. We can't even enforce vinyl windows where you're supposed to have a permit. And now we're talking about trying to enforce on something where we're not requiring them to pull a permit, where it's going to be just complaint driven. And what are you going to do then? You're going to go out and say to someone, oh, yeah, those oak trees have died, but they didn't know. Oh, the tree fell over on the neighbor's property? Oh, they didn't know. And by the way, we should require every property to retain all their rainwater on site, period. And now we're putting products in where they're going to be dumping that water into the street to go into the sewage in the middle of a drought. So we want now to make it to where people can't even get water into the ground, into our aquifers and the groundwater in a drought. Talk about being counterproductive. We should be trying to get every bit of water that falls from the sky into the ground to go into our basins. So at the very least, we should require all of this turf, if we do it, to have to be to retain water on site. For what purpose? I don't know. You've just let them put in plastic yards. I mean, at the very least, this should be treated like any other hardscape. I say not changing the amount of live plant material we require, period. If you're going to allow it, at least make it be regulated like any other. Just consider it another type of hardscape. Don't let it replace what we already require as live plant material. We should still require the amount of plant material that we require because it's about oxygen, it's about habitat, it's about keeping the dirt alive. I mean, you may say, well, not everyone's going to do it. That's bad policy. You should assume everyone's going to do it and say, is this what you want to live in? You want to increase the ambient air temperature another 10 degrees in these neighborhoods? You want to put it in mix in high-density multifamily areas to where children now can walk down the street and never experience a live plant or a butterfly because it's all plastic and hardscape and asphalt? What are we talking about? We should be completely going in the other direction. One of the reasons we're in a drought, or we have these repercussions of a drought, is because we're out of balance with nature, right? We should be trying to get back into balance with nature, back into harmony every we can, not go in the other direction. I just find this completely offensive, and there is no reason for it. So I certainly won't support changing the live landscape material. I mean, if you want to, I have no problem with looking at how large a plant's going to get over time and making that be what the requirement is, because we have been draconian in the past, and we've enforced on people that have planted natives saying, well, you don't have enough ground coverage, and we're not going to care that that plant becomes 6 feet in a few years. I mean, we should be looking at what happens down the road, but we should still be requiring live plants. So yeah, this is just, the wrong way to go, and I don't think we should change the amount of live plants we require. If you want, if we have to do this, at least just make it be regulated like any other hardscape. I have no argument with how some of it looks. Some of it looks horrible. And by the way, you're never going to get people to only put in the ones that you think looks good. There's no way we're going to be able to enforce that. It's a completely subjective standard, and people are going to start to complain. So I just think we're opening up a whole lot of trouble. We know we don't have the manpower to enforce this, to enforce the standards we're talking about. It's going to kill trees that it's near. It's just bad policy for us to be looking at.
Thank you, Ms. Freedom. That was a Freudian slip. Now, on the other hand, I would like to remind my colleagues that it is now state law that prevents council and any municipality to prohibit the placement of artificial turf. And it is only the aesthetic
That's not true.
that we may deal with.
Not what the law says.
This was a law drafted by our very own assemblyman, Mike Gatto. It passed the California Assembly, passed the California Senate, and it was signed by Governor Jerry Brown, perhaps one of the most environmentally sensitive governors, not just in the state of California, but in the entire nation. And dare I remind my colleagues that the state of California has the tightest air quality standards of any state in the union, perhaps the entire world. It has the highest water quality standards. It has the vehicle emission standards that are the highest. So this is something that the heat island impact and all these other things are a moot point and are out of order in a discussion today, unless someone is advocating that we violate state law. Because if that's what we're doing, let's just say that we do not recognize laws from Sacramento and we are going to display our civil disobedience. And I'm not going to be a mayor of a city in which that's being done, and I will not stand for that. What we are mandated to do is to set reasonable standards for the installation of the artificial turf. So yes, that is what the law is. We cannot prohibit. You asked for a prohibition of artificial turf. Why are we doing this? It's stupid. We have no right to do this. Well, we cannot stop it from being done.
Can I say something, Mr. Mayor? I want to thank, first of all, our Assembly member, Mike Gatto, for reaching out to me on this issue, for being willing to sit down with me as he did to talk about this. And we cannot prohibit artificial turf, and by the way, we don't now. We allow it in the rear. His law specifically does allow, and he's written a clarification of that, to say we are absolutely allowed to require how much we will allow. And that's what we're talking about. How much are we going to allow? My suggestion is we treat it like any other hardscape, keep the amount of live plant material that we require, and let artificial turf be counted as one of those hardscapes. By the way, his rule doesn't say that we can't even prohibit it in the front yards. It just says we cannot prohibit it. He wrote an email, which I have, that says as long as it's not zero, as long as you allow some, that's within keeping with the spirit of the law which I passed. So I just wanted to clarify that since I've had that conversation with his office, and Mr. Garcia has also been involved in that conversation.
Well, I think that's a key point, because if you are advocating that we permit 1%, 1 square inch of that we pass a law which permits 1 square inch and no more of artificial turf, I am of the strong opinion that that violates the state law that was passed.
Sorry, did I say that? I don't think I said that at all.
Said as long as there is some
That's what
permitted.
I told you his law said. What I am suggesting is that we treat artificial turf like any other hardscape. So we require whatever percentage we require in different zones of live plant material.
And why did you raise
same.
what his opinion was? I mean,
well, it's his law, and I was
clarify the
clarifying.
law. Let's clarify the law before we start toying with anything else. Mr. Garcia.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and I will attempt to clarify the law as much as it can be clarified, because the statute is not as clearly written as it could be. As you know, it does the language of the statute itself that was adopted by the legislature prohibits cities, counties, and charter cities from prohibiting installation of artificial turf. I think if you took that to its very literal interpretation, that would ostensibly prohibit cities from having any sort of regulation. As Councilmember Freeman alluded to, and we've dealt with this situation before, the sponsoring Assemblyman Gatto did put a letter in the Journal with respect to this legislation, stating that cities and counties can continue to set standards for the amount of land that must be covered by specific types of materials, provided those restrictions, do not require complete coverage of live planting material. So a couple things about that. One, this letter is part of the Journal. It's part of the legislative history. It may or may not be used if a court were to interpret this, but I would argue it's part of the record, and so a court may be entitled to rely on it. Could you be too cute by half by saying, okay, I will allow 1% artificial turf? I don't think so. I think you have to have a reasonable amount of artificial turf. With respect to could we continue to prohibit it in the front yard, I don't think so. One, I think that would violate the general intent of the statute, and then two, I would point out that in the initial presentation of this statute, the Assemblyman mentioned Glendale's ordinance as one of the ordinances that he sought to override. So I think we certainly have to allow it in the front yard. Whether we could continue to maintain our live landscaping requirements, which are 40% for the lot, 50% in the street setback, it's an open question, but I do believe that it would be allowed under the standards set by the statute as interpreted by the letter to the Journal. So I think what Councilmember Freeman is suggesting is allowed by the law, although certain people might disagree. That's certainly is, and I wish I could give you a more clear or plain interpretation, but given that the language in the statute is what it is, I can't say with 100% definiteness. I can't say for certain, though. I don't think we can continue to prohibit it in the front yard.
Okay, and the issue before us is standards.
Standards. How much live planting material to acquire? I think 50%, 40%. Those numbers are reasonable and would likely be held to be reasonable if viewed by a court.
Okay, let me go to my colleagues.
Okay, well, as I see my responsibilities here, they're twofold. It is twofold. One, to assure that the standards are high enough, but yet do not prohibit any of our residents from using artificial turf. And number two is to make sure that we integrate natural landscaping so that we provide a more natural aesthetic. So saying that, the consultant recommended that we have 40% artificial turf in the front yard. The city staff recommended 65%. I'd be willing to go somewhere in the middle of that, maybe 50% artificial turf and the rest drought tolerant. I think the standards that we should adopt are the standards of the consultant. I'd like to see the three colors, especially since Mr. Foy has said that the price is practically the same. I also would like to see the uneven tips. I want to see the at least 1 3/4 minimum height. I do like the idea of the borders. And I think that kind of softens the look. What else? I want to be sure that as the consultant says, the areas covered by artificial turf must drain to landscaped area. That's very important. What else did we? Let's see. Wide border on the sidewalk. No artificial turf under the trees, of course, and not in the parkways. I'm in favor of both of those parts of the ordinance, and I think that just about covers it. Drought tolerant. I think we should keep the drought tolerant as policy as we have it now, and not change that.
Scarpetta?
Yes, thank you. I think we need to know if we have a problem or not, and then go after a solution for it. First of all, we allowed artificial turf in backyards. I'd like to know how many people change their turf in the backyard. And since we don't have permitting process, I don't think we have a number. So also, what is the demand? Did we get so many calls from the community members that they want to install artificial turf in their front yard? I don't know. Do we have a high demand on installing artificial turf in front yards?
I think the discussion that's before you really is encapsulated between your colleagues here on the dais, to the extent that Mayor Najarian in the past has requested that we allow for turf, artificial turf, to one degree or another, and Councilmember Friedman has been adamantly opposed. Okay. So that's really what you see is great, in that you're getting the full spectrum of the debate.
Got it. Okay. In any case, we cannot enforce any of our ordinances as far as the front landscaping or landscaping goes, because we are in the phase 3 of water conservation. When we went to the phase 1, that went away. We cannot enforce it. So what if this drought lasts another 5 years? We cannot enforce any of these issues that we're talking about today to if we change our ordinance. Therefore, what I'm suggesting is not even touch our ordinance today. We don't need to change our landscaping ordinance, because we can't even enforce what we have. If you add something to it, what's the difference? We have a great ordinance. It's been working for many years. The drought-tolerant material is part of our ordinance today. If you want to use those, you're not prohibited. As far as the artificial turf goes, we can and we have to, I think, because this is part of the mandate, to add that to our ordinance. And I think what we need to look at tonight is if we want to add, because we have it already for the rear yard, the backyard, they can install it. But if we want to include the front yard as well, then we come up to that percentage as to what percentage of it we want to allow, because we cannot maybe prohibit, but we can regulate the percentage of the artificial turf that could be allowed. So I wrote so many notes in different parts of my paperwork, so I'm trying to button it up. I think we have a cycle right now of this drought going around. I think this is a cycle, and the drought is not going to last forever. With 2 days watering, I have some pictures. I don't know if I have to show it or not. I have some pictures. I would like to show some of the pictures that I took. With 2 days watering, in the same neighborhood, we have. Just keep going. This is the example of the properties that are with 2 days watering. Just keep moving forward, please. So, and stop here. This is something that it's not artificial turf, but keep going. But they put, look at this. This is in the same neighborhood, half a block away from each other. Keep moving. I tried to not to take pictures from the houses. Look at this one. I don't know what is this one. Next, please. This is not Glendale. I don't know if you want to go to this route. All cactuses and everything from. Keep going. More. Next. Look, is this in the same neighborhood? This is an apartment building, and they have drought-tolerant material as well as grass and as well as flower and everything else. Keep going. And this is with 2-day watering. Look, this is an apartment building. It's nice. It's not all green, but it's better than the composed granite, gravel, or anything else that are putting out. Move, please. Say, all green. 2 days watering, but look at this one. Next, please. I mean, I think we're jumping the gun. The law, the state mandates that we have some artificial turf to allow some artificial turf in front lawn. Maybe we can talk about that and see what percentage it is. Bear in mind, 50% of the front setback is landscape, live landscaping. That's the ordinance right now. And if you want to go 40% of that artificial turf, you're going to have 25 by 50. It's, I don't know, 1250, 40% of it is 600 square feet of artificial turf. And I don't know who would want to do that if they have the idea of the gentleman who brought to the table. If it's less expensive, it takes 1/10 of the water that we're using today. At the convention and the expo we went, I met a company. They have the Bermuda type grass that it takes 40% less water. They have we have San Augustine. My neighbors have San Augustine lawn, and they let it go for 2-3 months. It's dry as I thought. I think it's going to just fall apart. First rain, second rain, it comes back. It turns green. I'm not against putting artificial turf in our code with some regulation, but I don't want to change all the ordinances that we have in place right now. And it takes so much time from staff, so much energy and effort, when we cannot even enforce it. I don't know why are we even spending this much time on the type of material that people can. And plus, if they want to remove everything and install something else, we have to know what it is. If you want to replace one window in front of your house, you have to get a permit. Your front door, you have to get a permit. This is the neighborhood compatibility that we talked about for years. We fought for it for years. When you drive through to our neighborhoods, first thing you see is the landscaping, not the window on a house, not the door on the house. It's just this manicured lawns in the front. I know we're in drought. I know we're going through rough times, but this is a cycle. I think it's going to change. And I personally, we play soccer on artificial turf, and thank God for artificial turf for being there for soccer fields because you cannot maintain it any other way. Our kids play on artificial turf, but I don't know. I think we need to just look at tonight as to if we want to add artificial turf to our ordinance and come up, maybe have you go back and look at the different scenarios. If the house is on a corner in a Kenneth or Cumberland Heights and it has a 200-foot frontage on one side, 100-foot frontage on the other side, how much of a turf are you going to allow? If you have 3 feet border and then rest of it is artificial turf, it's almost 85-90%. So let's be reasonable, but I think we need to limit the amount of artificial turf to maybe 20% of front setback, because front landscaping, because rest of it can be done, and one day watering will still have a green lawn. Again, my yard is all turning yellow because we have gophers. It's just you can't fight them. You can't fight the
Yes, you can. Just
drought,
ask my husband. He'll tell you how to fight them.
Well, after the meeting, we're going
Fight
we're going to meet with your husband.
Can I say just a few things?
I'm sorry.
Well, let me give my specific opinions and recommendations. I do believe in the state law. I will be following state law this evening. I will be recommending a tricolor product. I believe I think 1 3/4 height is a little bit high. I'm thinking maybe 1 5/8 might be a little better. In terms of the percentage, I really think that we should leave the right to our residents to place as much artificial turf on their front lawn as possible, their front yard, because it is a drought issue. No one talks about the noise that a live front lawn takes. Whether you've got your Bermuda, your San Augustine, you're going to have your gardeners out there with their gas-powered 2-cycle motors polluting. You have to place nitrates on that, which leach into the soil. So there are ecological ramifications for a living lawn, grass lawn. I'd really like to go with the 80%. I think maybe Mr. Foy's diagram wasn't bad, which showed 75%. And if you throw in a tree, I think we need to respect the tree roots at the drip line. And although you didn't calculate it, that certainly is going to knock it way down to maybe the 60%. Most people, a lot of people have some sort of tree in their front lawn, in their front yard area. In terms of the straight drought tolerant component of this ordinance, 50% is currently the regulation. I think we should stick with that. In terms of the parkways, I agree that you should not have artificial turf in the parkways. I think the 6-inch rule or whatever, we should have some flexibility in that. Something objective, though, that it not impede pedestrians in any way. I think it's really up to the individual who wants to do it. We can't keep talking about the heat island. This is the California legislature that passed this. Their issues with the environment are renowned across this country, across this world. They're not concerned with it. And the way that this thing shot through both houses of the California legislature shows that there is a strong, overwhelming ground support, grassroots support for this ordinance to permit artificial turf. Because we are in a drought, and that's what's brought this upon us at this point. Well, let me go to Ms. Friedman.
Okay. Well, first, just to clarify a few things, I'm not against all artificial turf. I've got a friend that's got this little putting green in the backyard of artificial turf, and it's very cute and it serves a purpose. They also have a lot of live plant material. I'm mostly concerned about a wholesale replacement of plants and an overreaction to the drought that I think a lot of us are seeing around Los Angeles, with people taking out all of their plant material, and mostly a lot of it's coming from Turf Terminator, and it's kind of the way they do business, where they just rip everything out and put in a few things and call it a day. And we might be getting a very wet El Nino, and I wonder what's going to happen to these properties that are all DG or wood chips, a lot of which are on a slope and aren't going to have any plant material to hold any of that stuff down. I think it is going to be a real problem that people aren't thinking much about. And I want to clarify for the news press, who last time for some reason thought that I was saying that everyone should keep their lawns and printed that. That's not the case. I think that there's a place for lawns, and I don't think that lawns are always so horrible. But there's a lot of alternatives, as we heard today, that are drought tolerant and that don't require all that fertilizer, and some that don't even require mowing. I think there was one of your products that was called No Mow or something like that. And I'm assuming there's a reason why it's called that. And I know that there are a lot of native plants that only grow a couple inches that are lawn substitutes, like yarrow, that you don't have to mow and that you can if you want. So there's a lot of alternatives to traditional turf that serve a similar purpose, that's live plant material, that doesn't require all the fertilizers and the maintenance. And the reason is because they're native, a lot of them, and they're acclimated for our climate and for our type of drought cycle and our soil. That's why natives survive here well. They go through the cycle of drought and they look very toasty in the summer, and then the rains come and all of a sudden they explode in flowers and in greenery. So when you plant the natives, you don't have to have all that maintenance. So what I would suggest, if we're going to go down this route, is that we follow the consultant's recommendation in terms of their landscaping, and that we don't change our live plant requirement, but we allow people to use the artificial turf in their front yards as part of their hardscape, the same way that we now allow people to do a certain amount of decomposed granite or a certain amount of concrete for patios. We let that be artificial turf. And, really in terms of what you use, most people are not using giant swaths of lawn anyway for things like, throwing a football or laying a blanket down, and a small amount of artificial turf, if that's what you want to have, is going to serve that function. I don't like it. I personally don't like it. I don't think it's the right way to go. But given the law, I think that that's a more responsible way. Let's tread lightly and see where this goes rather than jumping in with, with both feet. And that's, I think, a good way of starting it. In terms of all of the other quality, I think we're kidding ourselves to think that we're going to be able to regulate or enforce any of this. And I think once the news press has the headline, artificial turf now allowed in front yards, you're going to start seeing people pulling out everything and putting this in. And then we're going to have this enforcement nightmare. But be it as it may, we're going to have to go down that road.
Mr. Mayor, I noticed in the back of the staff report there is a review of landscaping standards and use of artificial turf. And there are two things in there that I think are applicable tonight. Number one is outreach. I don't know if this is recommended or if the city is doing this, but I think in the outreach that we're going to be doing, everything has to be, all the information that we have has to be noted and given to the public, including the information that we got tonight, which I think is valuable, so that everyone is well aware of what the options are and what we can do, and they know what our standards are. Second thing, in that report, there is a certificate of completion, and I don't know if this is part of our protocol or if this is a suggestion, but if we can, and I know this is going to be administrative and manpower, but if we require some sort of certification of the artificial turf, I believe it tells you exactly what was done, what kind of artificial turf was put in. This would be a way to regulate, and I think that would be beneficial so that we know where it is, how much they put in, and who did it. Make sure that the job is done according to our standards and specifications. So those are my two comments. I mean, I agree with the mayor that this is something that we are mandated to do and to allow, and I agree with it because it gives people a choice. But I think that we have to set standards, and the standards have to be high enough so that everyone is comfortable with this decision. And I think if we keep our standards for our drought-tolerant plants where they are now, the landscaping, that is the right way to go, and I think we should do the same thing with the artificial turf. We have to have enough real plants, drought-tolerant plants, to soften this whole appearance of artificiality.
If I can, there was a question about the enforcement side of it, to your point specifically, and I appreciate you bringing that up. To the extent that we have a very clear ordinance, and again, it goes back to Phil's comment, we want something that is as clear and readily understood as possible, then the question becomes enforcement, and as you know, we have our administrative citation program. So the way I would envision, if the council does give us this direction at some point, adopts an ordinance, and we go forward, would be to be as clear as possible through outreach and enforcement so that those folks who would violate a very clear, hopefully understood, easily understood ordinance, when they receive that administrative citation, they know exactly what it is, because they will come back to this podium and say, I didn't know, the standard was unclear, I didn't understand exactly what was being asked of me. But those citations can add up and it can get very expensive. Ultimately, that's the tool that we would use, I would imagine, more than anything else, to achieve compliance with whatever standard the council wanted.
And then what do we do? What happens to those who have already violated this ordinance? Is that going to be on a complaint-driven basis as well? Because I can cite 5 or 6 yards that are absolutely not even close.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, not now. I'm talking about afterwards.
That is a policy discussion. I have to defer to the city attorney, because today it is not allowed. Today, violation would result in a code enforcement violation. So there is no grandfathering because it's a violation today. I mean, Mike.
I mean, that's absolutely correct. And to the extent the council changes the standards, and anybody who had it previously will have to comply with whatever new standards are put in place.
So those people will have to
I'm going to come to you.
come up to the standards, to the
Whatever
ordinance.
standards imposed, that's correct, unless council decides. But again, you can't grandfather something that was legal
But
in the
the
first place.
positive side of that would be if you did allow for the utilization of artificial turf in the front yard setback, the ability to comply with that would arguably be easier than to pull it all out and take it back to a native form, right? So all that has to come into play. But again, I can't understate or overstate enough. The idea is to have something that is concise and readily understandable, because people will do exactly what you said. Or as Councilman Member Friedman said, they'll look at it in the news press and say, I can do it now, I'm going to run out and do it. And we're saying not so fast. Make sure you know what you're doing, because there are consequences that go along with that action.
So therefore, those that are listening tonight and hear what the ordinance might be should take note.
They should take a very strong note of what could be the council's ultimate action. Again, what you're doing tonight is giving us direction.
Right,
I hear a good deal of consensus around, okay, we need to allow something. And really what Councilman Garpetian was outlining is much of the ordinance as it's been kind of contemplated and suggested to you. It sounds as though that there is one wing of the council that is saying as minimum as possible to still comply with the spirit and letter of the law, and another wing, as we've seen over these last few years, is to say as liberally applied as possible. Ultimately, this is going, and what I don't hear from the council is the follow through on what we had been suggesting is maybe don't get hooked into the issue of percentages. In terms of trying to measure each square inch, I think it's going to be imprecise and going to be confusing. But that isn't what I'm hearing from the council. I'm hearing from the council say the shorthand is 20% or 40% or 50% or 75 or 80% or whatever that number is. Somewhere between, it sounds from the city attorney, as little as 20 to pass the red face test of are we allowing the spirit of this ordinance, all the way to 80, what I heard the mayor say. So what I'm taking from council is you let the ordinance conceptually that is before you, or the ideas that are before you, gel and bring back to you a range somewhere between 20 and 80, and the council will make a decision at some point in the future.
Mr. Mayor?
Well, Ms. Friedman was waiting on her drought tolerant.
Well, first, I mean, to me, you either think that there's a value in having a certain amount of live plants or you don't. I personally think that there's a real public benefit to having live plants in our community. So I think if you're going to allow artificial turf, it's as a supplement to that, and it's not an aesthetic issue for me. I would even grant that maybe this stuff looks great. I don't really care as much about how it looks. I care about maintaining something that is an undeniable benefit for many, many reasons to the whole community. Live trees, we're a tree community, live plants. So I don't think we should weaken that. I do think in terms of the drought-resistant plants that we need to look at what they are at full maturity, not what they are when they're planted. Because if you try, I've seen more problems with people overplanting those landscapes in the beginning to make them look good. Some landscape designers will do that, or installers, and then later the people are having to pull out half their yard. And it's just gone crazy. So we should account for that, and that's not difficult to do. It's easy to say this will be such a size specimen, that kind of thing. Give those plants time to mature. And grow in. But I think that we should allow the artificial turf to be counted like any other hardscape. That would be my recommendation. And then to go with everything else that the consultant recommends, which is all of those quality and sort of landscaping issues, and that the staff has also recommended, the borders and all of that kind of stuff. And I would say just about the parkways that, I don't know how you easily codify it to where you allow plants that are more than 6 inches, but that still don't pose a hazard, but maybe you can do it. We certainly have to stop people from putting the boulders and that kind of thing in their parkways where it's almost like they're doing it on purpose and no one can park there. And I've even seen giant shrubs now in the parkways and cactuses and things that are, if they're not intended to keep people from parking in front of people's houses, are certainly kind of getting there. And, that's not right either.
I want to understand
Find
what do you
some
mean
way.
by hardscape?
Right now, we require, I think, whatever our live plant material requirement is for different zones, but we allow, so we say you have to have whatever live plant material, but then you can do, the rest can be a patio that's made out of concrete, brick.
So your suggestion is to keep that 50% live landscaping and only where they can do hardscape to do artificial turf.
But we don't necessarily say where even. We just say you get a certain amount. And I'm not saying we should measure it exactly, but you're kind of the same idea. So if you're going to have that 30%, might have been a patio, maybe it's a smaller patio and some of the artificial turf, that sort of thing. That would be my suggestion.
Okay. Mr. Garbage. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think with all due respect, we don't really know what we're talking about tonight here. If you remove 50% of your building or do some remodeling in your building, you kick that 50% rule, you need to comply with the new codes. But if you remove your entire landscaping, it doesn't trigger anything. I think what we need to do is, with everything else that we do tonight, if you want to remove your entire landscaping and do something different, the city needs to know what are you going to do with it. It's not that they take everything off and then they put, gravel or they put artificial turf on the entire thing and come back and say, I didn't know. Now, that's something that I think we need to, it's easier to enforce than have that in our code, that if you want to remove your entire landscaping and replace it with something else, we need to know what that something else is. Now, as far as the 40% or 50%, if you have a typical lot of 50%, 50 feet wide, 25 feet by 50 feet is 1,250 square feet. Today, with 50% landscaping, that would be 625 square feet of landscaping, live landscaping. Now, if you want to do 40% of that artificial turf, that's 250 square feet. That's 10 by 25. And it's going to look, like a little patch in the middle. So I think if part of our ordinance, if people come to the city to see what they have to do with their lots, we can educate them at that time and introduce them to different materials that may be less expensive, doesn't require so much water, and it's not a turf. I don't think everybody tomorrow is going to just grab that flag and run to the hills to put artificial turf in front of their houses. I think we need to be careful into introducing something that it will be difficult to reverse later, but we need to make sure that if they want to remove the entire landscaping, they need to come to the city and tell us, bring a little hand sketch plan and tell us what is it that they want to do. Otherwise, why have an ordinance? Because we can't enforce it. As long as we are in this water conservation ordinance today with a phase 3 or phase 1 or phase 2, we cannot enforce any of them. They can take the entire lot out, the landscaping out, and do nothing, and we can't say anything today because we are in drought. So if drought is over next year, within 6 months, by the time we go back and try to enforce 10 homes, maybe we have another drought. I think we're going around the same circle and trying to be reactive to this new law that state passed. We can allow artificial turf, but we need to know what they're doing. And 40% is on a typical house is going to be a patch of 10 by 25. So I don't think if people would want to do that or not. Most people want to cover the entire yard with the artificial turf, so they'd be done with it. So again, I think we don't have to touch our ordinance because it allows drought-tolerant material right now, and just introduce the artificial turf and come back with different ideas. If it's 50%, this is how is it going to look in different parts of the town, larger lots, smaller lots, corner lots, and then we can visualize it and see what it is that we want to do. But tonight, the 40% is 250 square feet. 80% will be, 500 square feet. Then what? It's not going to help us on drought because the rest of the yard is, still landscape. So, but on top of everything, the way it is today with 2-day watering, we saved, instead of 20% of conservation, we went up to 27% and still have green lawns. So by forcing this thing into the entire site of the front and the back and everything else, I don't think we're doing justice. I don't even think people will like that. So even people who change their backyard, the landscaping in their backyard. They didn't do the entire thing. I know a few people who did it, but just a play area maybe. Front yard, who plays in the front yard? So these are my comments, Mr. Mayor. I think we need to come back without changing the ordinance tonight. We need to come back with different ideas as to if it's 20%, how is it going to look, 40% and 80%. See what we can pick and choose from there at that time on different locations with different types of lots and different sizes of lots with different frontages. That would be my 2 cents. But don't touch our ordinance.
Well, they're going to
tonight.
come back anyway and they have several ideas. I don't think we've clearly resolved where we are on several of the key points. Some, I think we agree on quality. If we're going to have it, it's got to be a certain quality.
Understanding that tonight all you're doing is giving us direction. You're not voting on an ordinance. You're not introducing an ordinance.
And I do think I think that the irrigation part is important. I think that the water cannot drain to the street.
Right.
And it can't drain to the neighbors.
So again, I think to the extent, just to help sum up, it sounds as though, like right now, 40% of the lot area that's permanently landscaped has to be of the area that's landscaped has to be
50% of that.
50% of the 40% has to be with live material. Yeah, and so the other half can be non-live material. What we have been discussing is whether or not the non-live material should just include artificial turf as one more non-live material. Now, whether that ultimately is too much or too little for the council's taste will be included in, and I don't hear any consensus on that matter from the council members now. And so, as I said earlier, what we'll do, it sounds like there's enough consensus on some of the other elements of it. We would bring you back the discussion for the initiation of an ordinance, and at that time, we would hope that you could tell us to ratchet up or ratchet down the degree of artificial turf in that ultimate ratio for the landscaped area.
And meanwhile, what can we do from tomorrow to let people know that they can't just take everything out and do whatever they want until this ordinance comes back? I don't know what is our rights at this point.
Well, I mean, we have an ordinance that prohibits artificial turf.
Can we?
Okay, in the street setbacks visible from the public right away.
I'm sorry?
I'm not talking about just artificial turf. I'm talking about overall. I mean, they can remove everything and put nothing or decompose granite or gravel or boulders.
You're out of compliance. You're out of compliance. And the very clear line that can be drawn by the council is non-compliance means a code enforcement violation that ultimately could result in an administrative citation.
The message is nothing's changed tonight.
Hold on. On that regard, I would like to propose an amnesty period until this all gets straightened out. While we're dealing with this, it may very well be that someone who has installed it can modify it to comply with whatever ultimate law we come with. So there's a lot of people stuck in the middle of this. Not a lot, maybe a handful that we know of.
My thing is not about the artificial turf only. It's about overall. I mean, the neighborhoods are being destroyed, to be honest with you, the way it is. I mean, we're just doing whatever they want. And
well, my comments are directed mainly towards the folks that put in artificial turf.
With those, there has been a policy of not. We've had some going from a certain day. We've said you can't do it, and we've been enforcing those. I'm not sure. I'm aware of any current cases that we have. We want to make clear that there's no amnesty going forward. You can't go out and plant artificial turf. I think in terms of if you want a sort of a stay on enforcement, we would need to bring that back because that really wasn't part of the agenda.
Stay on enforcement is probably
we are using our discretion where we can to put things in abeyance, knowing that this issue is coming forward.
And yeah, exactly. And part of that period of abeyance is we don't want to be inconsistent in enforcement, knowing that the council is having this discussion. And so rather than tell you today that you can't, rather than come to you today and enforce upon you, recognizing that tomorrow we may come back and say, well, some elements of that are okay or not okay, we don't want to put the residents through that. And this discussion has been a long time coming. The advent of the Assembly bill does change it to a degree, but I think the general principles remain the same. Prior to the Assembly bill, there was probably an even money chance that artificial turf does not get allowed in the front yard setback. post-assembly bill, that probably is not likely. And so that does have some impact here. But again, what I hear council saying is there is enough on the parkways, on the drought tolerant landscaping, everything but, surprise, surprise, on the artificial turf. And do we apply that liberally or very conservatively is the question. But we can bring that back to you.
Is there a legislative analyst's report that clarifies the?
I don't believe there's a legislative analyst report. There are committee reports that don't really shed any light on that particular issue. I think the only thing that, frankly, of all the legislative history is the letter to the Journal. It's part of the history, just like we have on some of the other recent
legislation. Should we
ask
the Assemblyman to come in? He's smart enough not to get involved in this.
Sure, he doesn't want to be
at this point. Okay, so when will this be coming back?
Could we have until November 20 or dark? I'm trying to think of the dark days. Mid-November.
When mid-November? Because
probably
week before Thanksgiving, I'm gone.
We're dark that Tuesday before. We're dark.
I think it's the 10th. I think it's the 10th, November 10th.
You said we have no meetings.
Right now
Will staff have something
I'm
tangible
checking,
for
I'm
us
checking.
to go on?
Well,
3 weeks?
From all of our clear direction.
Coming back in 3 weeks means I have about a week to prepare, and it just takes getting visual samples of real life situations is pretty labor intensive. There are some things we do have to come back in December for the state model water ordinance. We can come back in December probably with parkways as well. So yeah.
First or the 8th?
I believe the 8th is our last meeting of the year, but that doesn't mean we can't schedule additional meetings.
I think the 8th probably. 8th. Let's plan it for the 8th. December 8th. Okay. And there's no vote on this issue. This is just.
So just for the record, are we doing artificial turf or?
No motion is necessary, Mr. Mayor, since we're coming back before the initiation.
Okay. Next item, please.
Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is oral communication. This is a 5-minute portion. Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Council may question or respond to a speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. City manager may refer the matter to the appropriate department for investigation and report.
Margaret Hammond, you're the first speaker.
Oh.
Who won the Dodger game, by the way?
Dodgers.
3-1, Dodgers did.
They should hear.
The prayers were answered.
Who won the debate? Who won the Democratic debate?
It's a tougher question to answer, Madam Councilwoman.
I'm more interested in
quiet,
that.
quiet.
Hi, Margaret.
Quiet.
Good evening, City Council. I was just getting information on how to replant my front lawn. I've let it die. The oak trees killed it. And so I need to have it replanted. So I'm going to get some information. My name is Margaret Hammond. I haven't been here for a while. Good to see you all. And I'm going to get on with it. The first thing is the bulky items. Down in my area, we should be attached to Glendale, to LA, with some of the junk that's lying around at the corner of Adams and Palmer, in front of a vacant lot there. There's a 3-piece couch, and it's unbelievable. It's been there for a couple of weeks. I meant to go back tonight and have a look and see if it was still there, but it's been aggravating me. Let's get together and decide we want Glendale to be a clean and beautiful city. And that means calling your bulky item 818-548-3916. And people have been saying to me, Margaret, when are you going to get up and give that number out? We've got to do something about all this junk. My prime reason for being here tonight is to advocate for homeless veterans who need homes and services. In particular, the question of the Westwood facility not providing the housing that should be given to them by rights, and that there was a big announcement made. Oh, they provided 65 new homes. It should be 6,500 on that property in Westwood, not 65. That's a disgrace. And so many of them are homeless. And you know, the rate of suicide is going up every day on the veterans. We have to do something. It's really terrible. It just makes me so sad. And the property was donated to the veterans, to be used for veterans. And yet here, the people, the management in charge of that, rented out, for $13,000 a year. USC has a stadium on there. Now, is that right? No. And where did the money go? Where has the money been going since that stadium was allowed to be on there, and other property, other businesses? Where has that money been going? Has it been going to the veterans? I don't think so. Not according to what you read and see about the poor guys. It's just so sad when you think about it. And, you know, coming back locally, I'd like to know, for instance, how many veterans are actually being housed in our veteran housing here in Glendale. I've heard some stories, and I'm going to go after it now that I'm get my energy back. So that we need to be looking into the fact that if you're going to have homes for the veterans, then there should be veterans in those homes. Not other people that come, the seniors or whoever, whatever. It should be for the veterans, and that's who should be in those homes. So I'm really hoping that you realize, people out there, what you can do is you contact the veteran, whatever, facilities, send letters, send emails, and say, these veterans need to have homes. They don't want to be homeless. And that's the truth of it. They want, not that they don't want, they just don't have any choice in the matter. They're on the streets and they're pretty sad, some of them, physically. Another one of my interests in my life is provide service to the community, is the Assistance League of Glendale. We're all volunteers there. Some of them are old ladies like me, and some are younger. But we all try to feel that we're giving a contribution to our city. We provide, for instance, clothing, Operation School Bell. We clothed more than 500 school children who needed clothing in our schools. Cerritos, Muir, all the schools in Glendale. The Senior Neighborhood Fellowship, we have luncheons for the seniors once a month. Scholarships, we give out $7,000 scholarships to high school students so they can go on to college, and returning women college and veterans, women veterans. We do SAT seminars, authors and illustrators. They go and have the authors, and we give $1,500 to the libraries of each school that we go to, and we go to all the schools in Glendale at some period of time. So we do a lot, and the ladies, we do not have any CEOs like Goodwill that has $250,000 up to $500,000. We are not paid a nickel. The only paid help we have is the gardening, because some of us are just too darn old to do gardening anymore. So thank you very much for listening to me, and please keep those poor veterans in your prayers and try to help them any way we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. I don't have any other cards.
Can I make a few comments?
Yes.
Margaret, I just want to let you know that you should never feel that Assistance League is underappreciated, because I know the goodwill and everything that you do in this community is very valuable. And also they have a great great thrift shop on Harvard and Louise, and everybody should go and shop there sometimes because it's a really great place to go.
We can use donations to that.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're welcome. And the other thing I want to ask Mr. Ochoa is the GYA are we still using GYA to pick up the bulky items so that they're driving through the city looking for them?
Yes,
or
ma'am.
do they have to be reported?
Well, both,
on
actually.
the prowl?
So through the good work of Mr. Galani and folks in management services, we've identified a number of hot spots. We make those rounds. Unfortunately, it seems like there's a never-ending amount of mattresses and sofas. But yes, it's both. They call them in, and we make the rounds.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any new business? No. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Yes.
We're adjourned.